Hachiman Hikigaya is a social outcast who got brutally rejected by his crush, making him a bitter loner who hates love. But his life takes a drastic turn when his teacher forces him to join a club with the prettiest girl in school, Yukino. However, she comes off as icy and mean because she was bullied in middle school and now has no friends. Now that they're stuck together, they start bringing out the best in each other. They start falling in love. We're diving into my teen romantic comedy. Get comfortable and enjoy this adorable little love story. The story kicks off when Hachiman walks into the teacher's office, where Miss Shizuka reviews the essay he turned in. It pisses her off so badly that she looks ready to rearrange his entire face. She then drags him to a vacant classroom, where he spots Yukino from Class J, which is literally the top performing class in the whole school. Shizuka explains to Yukino that Hachiman is joining the club as a penalty for submitting a garbage essay, but her real motive for enrolling him is to get him to finally burst a nut. Yukino first refuses because dude looks like a little charity case, but the moment Shizuka mentions he has a massive cucumber as pee-pee, Yukino gives him the green light. Once Shizuka bounces, Yukino breaks it down that this is the volunteers club, and reminds him he should be thankful they even let him through the door. But the second Hachiman starts hyping himself up, Yukino claps back that his bruised ego is exactly why he ain't got a single chick to cream his bed at night, so he needs to fix his whole personality.
Emotional damage!
Right at that moment, Shizuka walks through the door, and Hachiman demands to know why everybody's pressing him to change when he's completely cool with who he is. That kicks off yet another argument, which Shizuka squashes by challenging them both to a competition. She lays it out that whoever racks up the most volunteer work takes the W, and the loser has to honor one demand from the winner. Next day, Hachiman rolls into the club room to find Yukino sitting by herself, and straight up asks how someone with her looks and personality has 0 friends. Yukino fires back by opening up about how she got bullied by other girls because every boy was chasing after her, and she's set on wiping out that kind of jealousy in people. Right then, Hachiman puts himself forward as a potential friend to have her back, but she shuts that down without a second thought. Out of nowhere, a girl named Yui steps into the room, but immediately loses interest the second she lays eyes on Hachiman's rough mug. Yukino pulls up a chair for her, and watching her and Hachiman go at it, Yui gets hyped and declares this club is a vibe before jumping into the roast session herself. Later on, Yui drops that she wants to bake cookies because she's on a mission to secure some romance, and since she's got 0 confidence in her baking game, she's calling on the Volunteers Club for backup. Yukino agrees to take her under her wing, and after a bunch of failed attempts and a full-on lecture from Yukino, Yui eventually starts to figure it out. Still, her cookies are nowhere near something you'd actually want to eat, and she starts thinking about calling it quits. That's when Hachiman swoops in and breaks it to her that dudes are so starved for attention that they'll go absolutely crazy even over cookies that taste like cardboard. That flips Yui's whole outlook, and she decides to handle things on her own terms rather than having Yukino carry her the whole way. Fast forward a week, Yui strolls in clutching a bag of cookies. She gets into a conversation with Yukino, so Hachiman dips to give them some room. That's when Yui chases him down and hands him a separate bag, showing appreciation for the advice he dropped. Later on, he digs out a charred heart-shaped cookie from the bag, and even though it hits worse than British cuisine, he chows it down anyway.
Donkey!
The following day, everyone in class is hanging out in their little cliques, while Hachiman is parked in a corner grinding out yet another essay because he's a certified sore loser. He thinks creatures that travel in packs are weak and fragile, and he'd rather model himself after a grizzly bear, which handles life just fine flying solo. Later, he hauls the essay over to Miss Shizuka, who is thoroughly unimpressed by his smug attitude toward people who roll in groups. He clocks that she's not exactly a group person either, seeing as she gets absolutely no night action, which scores him a fist straight to the gut. He then brings up what she plans to do about his showdown with Yukino, and Shizuka says she'll make her call once there's enough data on the table. She also drops that both he and Yukino are stubborn wildcards, and she's genuinely worried they're going to struggle hard once they hit the real world. Later, Hachiman is eating lunch inside his classroom because it's absolutely dumping rain outside. He then clocks a cluster of classmates, including Queen Bee Yumiko and Rizzler Hayato, cooking up plans for later, while Yui just stands there, barely able to get a single word out. Yumiko then orders Yui to go fetch her a drink, but when Yui mentions she'll be gone for the entire lunch period, Yumiko gets heated and calls her out for ditching the group for a while now. She pushes Yui to just say what she's feeling, but Yui stalls and says it's something personal. This tips Yui right to the edge of a full meltdown, and while Hachiman plays it like he couldn't care less, Something buried inside him is screaming that he needs to pull her out of this situation. He eventually drags himself to his feet, but the moment Yumiko tells him to butt out, he loses all nerve and drops right back into his seat. Right at that moment, Yukino strolls in and goes off on Yui for leaving her waiting that long. She says Yui should have shot her a text if she was going to be late, and Yui walks up to her, explaining that she simply doesn't have her number. Yukino clocks that it isn't completely Yui's fault and apologizes, but that sets Yumiko off since she was still mid-conversation with Yui. When she brings it up, Yukino fires back that it wasn't a conversation. She was just steamrolling Yui with her own opinions. She brands her a monkey trying to assert dominance by waving her strength around and reminds her that this is not a movie about apes. Before it boils over into something ugly, Hayato wedges himself in and tells everyone to take a breath. Yukino then coolly tells Yui to handle her business and link up with her once she's wrapped. After she dips, everyone else drains out of the classroom to escape the tension, and Hachiman decides he's doing the same. But as he's heading out, Yui quietly says she saw him rise to his feet for her, and even though he never followed through, she appreciates it all the same. Yui then steps up to Yumiko and admits she's always struggled to click with the rest of them, and she's been dragging herself along just to fit in. As she keeps talking, Yumiko stays locked onto her phone and tunes out every single word. Yui then says Yukino and Hachiman just say exactly what they think, without losing sleep over anyone's opinion. And that's the kind of person she wants to become. What she doesn't realize is that both of them are posted right outside the door, catching every single word she's putting out. Eventually, Yui tells Yumiko she doesn't want to keep forcing herself to hang around the group, but she hopes they can stay cool even when they're not in each other's space, and Yumiko signs off on that. Yukino catches all of it, feels a quiet swell of pride, and pieces out, while Yui steps into the hallway and spots Hachiman lurking there by himself. The second it clicks that he heard her hyping him up, Yui goes completely red and hits him with a creepy stalker label before hustling off to catch Yukino. After school, he rolls up to find both of them camped outside the club room with their faces nearly glued to the window. He walks over, and they fill him in that something is seriously sussy going on inside the club room. Hachiman takes point and pushes through the door, only to run straight into Jiraiya's cousin. The guy tells Hachiman he's been waiting on him, but his whole entrance was so aggressively cringe that Hachiman tells him flat out he has no idea who he is. When the dude just keeps running his mouth anyway, Hachiman calls him by name, Yoshiteru, and asks what he's doing here. Yoshiteru, fully committed to his bargain bin samurai aesthetic, reveals that Miss Shizuka pointed him this way, and he's got something he needs their help with. As he keeps renting into the void, Yukino leans over and asks Hachiman whether the guy broke out of a psychiatric facility, and Hachiman confirms he's putting on a masterclass in teenage delusion. Turns out, Yoshiteru built an entire Shogun persona in his head as a brat, and he's been living it out in real life without ever noticing that he makes everyone around him physically cringe. His Shogun character used to pledge loyalty to a god with the last name Hachiman, so Yoshiteru basically conscripts him into playing that deity in his whole unhinged fantasy world. Hachiman admits he was knee-deep in this kind of roleplay as a kid, but he eventually grew out of it, unlike Yoshiteru, who is still running it at full speed. Apparently, Yoshiteru has started noticing things are spiraling out of control, so he's turning to the club to help him kick this habit for good. While Yukino manages him, Hachiman spots loose pages thrown all over the room and starts picking them up. Yoshiteru then reveals those pages are actually a manuscript for a novel he put together, and he wants their eyes on it. He refuses to drop it online because Twitter users are way too feral for that, but Hachiman cautions him that Yukino is genuinely more dangerous than any online cloud chaser. Later, as they all walk home, Yoshiteru won't stop talking about his novel's characters, but Hachiman has fully checked out mentally, drifting back to the memory of a road accident involving a dog that happened to him once. That night, both Hachiman and Yukino dig through the manuscript on their own, while Yui is at home, kicked back watching a comedy show on television. The next morning, he bumps into Yui at a school parking lot, and she immediately notices he looks like he hasn't slept in days. He tells her the novel is responsible for his condition, then flips it and asks why she looks completely fine if she also read the thing. Yui panics and starts performing tiredness on cue, but Hachiman sees straight through her act without even blinking. Later, he pushes open the clubroom door and finds Yukino completely out cold in her chair. He creeps over slowly and whispers that she actually did a solid job, but the instant her eyes crack open, she goes right back to clowning on him. Hachiman mentally roasts himself for letting her appearance trick him again, fully aware by now that she is a full-on devil wrapped in a pretty package. A little while after, Yoshiteru shows up and hits them up for a review, and Yukino tells him with perfect composure that she doesn't have much experience with that sort of thing. Yoshiteru waves that off and tells her to just say whatever's on her mind, and she goes fully scorched earth, declaring the novel is dull and genuinely painful to sit through. Even though he's clearly taking hits, Yoshiteru asks her to break it down, and she tells him his grammar is an absolute catastrophe. She also picks apart the entire plot structure and tells him to never hand off a story that doesn't have an ending. At that point, Yoshiteru crumples to his knees and pivots to Hachiman, praying he's about to throw him a lifeline. Hachiman flashes him the warmest smile imaginable to crank his expectations all the way up, then casually asks which existing book he ripped this whole thing from, sending the guy completely to the floor. On his way out the door, he asks if they'll take a look at his next piece, which has both of them privately wondering if the guy is addicted to being roasted. Yoshiteru admits that even though they went absolutely feral on him, watching them actually engage with his writing made him genuinely happy, and he's locked in on pushing forward. He then thanks them in his signature samurai style and heads out, leaving Hachiman quietly stunned by the sheer, unhinged passion this guy brings to his craft. The following morning, during tennis practice, nobody wants to pair up with Hachiman, so he tells the coach he isn't feeling great and needs to sit out. While he's hitting against a wall, he overhears some boys hyping up the class's golden boy, Hayato. Out of nowhere, one of them launches the ball at Hachiman and tells him to toss it back, which ticks him off because his class can't even get his name right. On top of everything, he feels like a total doormat, running ball duty for Hayato's little crew. So after class, he parks himself outside alone, enjoying his meal while the ocean breeze runs through his hair. He mentions how the school sits near a beach and how the wind flips direction somewhere around midday. Out of nowhere, Yui spots him and asks what he's doing out here solo. He says he eats lunch here every single day, which throws Yui off because she can't wrap her head around him actually enjoying solitude. He then flips the question back at her, and Yui says it's because she lost a bet to Yukino and this is her penalty. Hachiman figures the punishment is being stuck talking to him, but she clarifies she was just passing through to grab some drinks. Hachiman is low-key relieved because it meant she'd bounce soon, but Yui plops down next to him and starts yapping about things he couldn't care less about. She even brings up how both he and Yukino hate being in groups, yet when those two interact with each other, they basically become one. Hachiman tells her the dynamic between them is too layered for her pea-sized brain to process, which gets Yui a little heated. She goes full hands-on mode and even clocks him on the head, saying she's every bit as sharp as either of them. She then asks if he remembers the day of the entrance exam, and Hachiman mentions he got into a car accident that day. Before the conversation can go any deeper, some guy walks up and asks Yui how things are going. After a quick exchange, the guy shifts his focus to Hachiman, saying he caught him practicing and that his form is actually fire. Hachiman has zero clue who this person is, which leaves Yui speechless because they literally share a classroom. The guy then introduces himself as Sai, but Hachiman immediately starts catching the ick because he's convinced Sai is a girl. He says he doesn't roll with girls, but the moment Sai confirms he's a dude, Hachiman's whole jaw detaches from his skull. Later, as they walk over to the tennis court together, Hachiman gets butterflies every time he glances at Sai and starts seriously questioning where exactly his tastes are pointing. Sai then reveals his usual partner didn't show up and politely asks if Hachiman would fill in for him. Hachiman is so absolutely cooked over Sai that he'd hand the man his entire life savings without blinking. After the session wraps up, Sai tells him he's genuinely good, and Hachiman gets all flustered because this man is sitting dangerously close. Sai then gets a little gloomy and admits their tennis club hasn't had a solid member in forever, and it's going to collapse once the third years graduate. They're seriously hurting for a reliable player, and Sai is convinced Hachiman would be the perfect fit for their roster. Later, he brings the whole thing up with Yukino, secretly hoping she'll give the green light so he can dip from the volunteer club. From there, he'd quietly ghost a tennis club too, and he'd be a completely free man before long. Yukino, however, tells him he looks like someone who'd die out jogging, so there's zero chance he survives tennis full-time. She's confident he'd play so terribly that the whole club would band together just to kick him out, but even that wouldn't actually fix their situation. Hachiman knows she's not wrong, so he asks her if there's literally anything they can do for Sai's sake. She finds it genuinely weird that he's worried about someone other than himself, but even so, she can't cook up a solid solution. Right then, Yui drags Sai into the club, saying the boy needs some extra hands, and where better to find them than a room packed with people doing absolutely nothing. Yukino, however, informs her that she's not actually a registered member of this club, which completely blindsides her. Yukino adds that she never handed in any membership form to begin with, and Yui immediately sprints off to fill one out. Yukino then turns her focus to Sai, and he presents them with an official request form, explaining that he wants to sharpen his tennis skills so he can inspire the rest of the club. Yukino accepts the request, and for the next several days, she absolutely puts both him and Yui through the ringer. One day, Sai eats dirt during practice, but when he refuses to quit, Yukino steps back and puts Yui in charge of him. Sai starts assuming Yukino has written him off since his progress has basically flatlined, but Yui defends her, saying she's not the kind of person to abandon someone who genuinely needs her. At that moment, Yumiko and his whole squad of beach bros roll in, announcing they want to use the court too. Hachiman steps up and shuts it down, saying Sai has official permission to use this court, and it's not up for grabs. This kicks off a petty little standoff between him and Yumiko, which Hayato de-escalates by suggesting they all just share the space. Hachiman, however, isn't here for that energy and starts coming at Hayato too. Hayato clocks that he's struck a nerve and offers an apology, but Hachiman is nowhere near done. He tells him he's already drowning in girls and should feel some type of shame for swooping in on Sai's court like that. Yoshiteru materializes from thin air to back him up, so Hayato drops the niceties and throws down a challenge, a match where the winner claims the court during breaks and gets to help Sai with his training. Yumiko pitches mixed doubles to spice things up, and Yui immediately throws her name in to partner with Sai. Yumiko tells her to reconsider, but Yui isn't budging, saying the club comes before everything else. As they get into position, Yumiko claims the first point, and Yui casually reveals she was actually on the tennis team back in middle school. As the match rolls on, Yui and Hachiman drop the first set thanks to Yumiko, and Yui even rolls her ankle in the process. That's when Hachiman tells her to plant herself in one spot and let him handle both opponents entirely on his own. Yui is skeptical, but hands him the reins and steps off the court, making everyone outside think they had some kind of falling out. He tunes out the chatter and locks in to take them both on, but right then, Yui comes back with Yukino in tow. She asks Yui to break down what's happening and finds out they're a player short for the match to decide who keeps the court. Yukino then passes a box of bandages over to Sai, telling him she didn't leave because she lost faith, but because she was genuinely scared he'd hurt himself. She then pivots to Yumiko and tells her straight up that she won't hold back and will grind her pride into nothing. With the trash talk settled, both teams reset and the match picks back up. And this time around, Yumiko runs directly into her personal worst nightmare. Serve after serve, Yukino obliterates the opposition and single-handedly carries the set for her squad. But when the second set kicks off, Yukino admits her biggest weakness is stamina, meaning she can't keep up that same level of output in the final set. That's exactly why she's handing the match off to Hachiman, because she knows the skill is there, and flattering people has never been something she does. Hearing that, Hachiman suddenly clicks into full protagonist mode and sends the ball flying, using the sea breeze he knows like the back of his hand to bend the ball's path midair. For the final point, he launches the ball straight up, and after it hits the ground once, it sails clean over the fence. Yumiko scrambles to return it, but stumbles right into Hayato's arms. And just like that, Hachiman seals the win for his team. Somehow though, the whole crowd erupts for Hayato, because that boy just accidentally secured himself the king of sucking. As Yukino helps Yui hobble over to the nurse's office, Sai walks up to Hachiman and hits him with a soft, grateful smile, and Hachiman's entire body temperature spikes just from making eye contact. Later, he swings by the nurse's office to check on Yui, only to walk in on her and Yukino mid-wardrobe change. Yui doesn't hesitate and sends the racket straight into his face, launching him clean out of the room. A couple days later, Hachiman's little sister Komachi is flipping through a romance magazine in the living room when he walks in and tells her it's time to leave for school. She instantly jumps up and starts pelting him with her clothes because she physically cannot stand looking at his disaster of a face. After tidying up the chaos she left behind, Hachiman steps outside and finds her already perched on the bicycle waiting. She tells him they're riding together today and warns him not to go crashing into anything. This pulls Hachiman back to his very first day of school when he spotted a dog about to get flattened and threw himself in front of the car to save it. He ended up in the hospital and missed a whole month of school, which is the direct reason he has 0 friends today. Back in the present, Komachi casually mentions that the dog's owner brought him sweets while he was knocked out, and she went ahead and finished every single one. As luck would have it, that girl attends the same school as him, but since Komachi can't recall her name, Hachiman has to take a shot in the dark. After dropping her off at her school, Hachiman makes his way to the staff room where Miss Shizuka reads yet another unhinged essay he submitted about being a stay-at-home husband, despite being firmly on track to die without ever knowing a woman's touch. Shizuka is absolutely livid that joining the volunteer club has done nothing to fix him, and when Hachiman refuses to take her seriously, she introduces her fist to his gut. Afterward, she informs him that he needs to assemble a group of 3 for the upcoming class trip, but Hachiman would rather do literally anything else than spend time with strangers. Later, he makes his way to the club room and finds Yukino doing her usual reading. Right then, Yui bursts in and immediately starts going off on him, and Yukino explains that since he'd been missing for days, Yui had basically launched a full search operation. Nobody in the school apparently knows who Hachiman even is, and Yui is frustrated because she had no way of reaching him. She then gets all shy and nervously asks for his number so they can actually stay in contact outside of club hours. Hachiman doesn't even flinch and just passes her his phone, telling her to punch her number in herself. Yui is caught off guard that he handed it over that easily, then immediately starts typing at lightning speed. When Hachiman brings it up, she claps back saying his typing must be sluggish because he's never had a girl in his life. Hachiman, however, claims that back in the day he had girls lined up wanting to sucking his juicy meat, which genuinely shocks Yui. He also tells her he scored a girl's number once and texted her all the time, but she was so obsessed with her wellness routine that she'd knock out at 7 p.m. Yui has no idea he's referring to a younger Yukino, so Yukino cuts in and reveals the girl was actually wide awake and just lied about being asleep to dodge him. This sets off a little spat between the two, and Yukino tells Yui to keep her distance from Hachiman because he's the type to blast her with disturbing videos with full volume at midnight. Right then, Hayato strolls into the room, saying Miss Shizuka sent him because he's dealing with something he needs help sorting out. He then explains that someone has been blasting cryptic messages about his friend group to the entire school, and Yui reveals she's been getting them too. Hayato's goal isn't to expose this person, but to squash things peacefully, and that response genuinely irritates Hachiman. He breaks it down by saying that because Hayato is perfectly content with his own life, he unconsciously pressures everyone around him to mirror that satisfaction, which is deeply aggravating for someone as ordinary and invisible as Hachiman. Even though Hayato doesn't want to go after the culprit, Yukino insists it's the only real move and flatly declares she will obliterate whoever is behind it, which visibly unsettles him. She then asks whether anything out of the ordinary happened in class recently, but both Hayato and Yui agree everything seemed completely normal. Right then, Hachiman recalls what Miss Shizuka mentioned earlier about the upcoming group assignments, and it hits him that the weird texts they've been receiving might actually be connected to that. As everyone tries to piece it together, Yui suggests that since the groups need to be exactly 3 people, someone terrified of being left out might be stirring up drama as a way to dodge that rejection. Hachiman nods along, saying it tracks, but Hayato pushes back and points out that the messages aren't just aimed at one person, all 3 of them are targets. That's when Hachiman explains the messages are probably designed to throw everyone off and make the source impossible to trace. Yukino then asks Hayato to tell them more about his boys Uka, Tobi, and Yamato. But since Hayato is fundamentally wired to see the best in people, he doesn't give them much to work with. Yukino runs out of patience fast and assigns Yui to do some low-key intelligence gathering. But when Hachiman notices Yui looking uneasy about it, since it could tank her reputation, he volunteers to handle it himself, figuring he's got nothing left to lose in that department. Watching him step up lights a fire under Yui, and she decides to jump in too, because she simply cannot bring herself to say no to Yukino, which earns her a flustered little blush from the girl. Later that day, Yui catches up with Hachiman and lets him know she's decided to work the girl's side and feel out what they think of the guys. After Hachiman gives her the nod, she slides over to Yumiko and Hina and casually drops the boys into conversation, hoping something useful floats to the surface. She asks why Uka, Tobe, and Yamato have been acting off lately, but the randomness of the question immediately raises flags. Yumiko figures Yui must be crushing on one of them, but the moment Yui shuts that down, Hina completely loses it and starts oversharing about how she thinks about how she uses her toy every night while thinking about every one of them. Mortified, Yui ejects herself from the conversation and sprints back to Hachiman and Yukino, fully admitting she crashed and burned. Hachiman tells her she came in way too hot and takes things into his own hands, quietly keeping tabs on Hayato's crew from across the room. That's when Sai appears, and Hachiman's face goes red on the spot. Sai asks whether Hachiman has locked in a group for the trip, mentioning that he's already sorted his own picks out. Hachiman isn't shocked since Sai runs deep in the tennis club and admits he hasn't picked anyone because he genuinely has no one to pick. Sai offers to be his friend, which sends Hachiman into a full philosophical spiral about what friendship even means. He then looks over at Sai and says his name out loud for the very first time, and Sai lights up like he just won something. Hachiman then asks Sai to call him by his name too, and when he does, Hachiman gets so overwhelmed. Just then, Hayato materializes and asks Hachiman if he's made any progress. Hachiman watches Uka, Tobe, and Yamato for a beat before calling everyone back to the club room. He lays it out plainly. Those 3 aren't actually close friends. They just orbit each other because they're all chasing Hayato's approval. When Yukino asks what the play is, Hachiman grins and says Hayato needs to physically remove himself so the 3 of them can figure out a real friendship without him as the anchor. Hayato takes it on board and later reports back to Hachiman that the trio was completely blindsided when he told them he wasn't grouping with them, but he's holding on to the hope that it'll push them forward. Then, almost offhandedly, he asks Hachiman to be his partner instead. Right on cue, Sai reappears and announces he's folding himself into the group too. For just a second, Hachiman entertains the thought that this chaotic little trio might actually have a shot. The next day, Hachiman rows into class after the bell and calls it a power move. He tries to justify it by saying even heroes and cops show up late, but Miss Shizuka is so done with his garbage that she sends her fist straight into his face. Right on cue, a silver-haired stacked girl named Saki strolls into the class and clocks him sprawled out on the floor. As she walks by, Hachiman makes a comment about her black lace, and she calls him an idiot before sliding into her seat by the window. After school, Hachiman spots Saki checking out a summer session sign-up, but she bounces with a sigh. Later, he catches Yui, Yukino, and Sai chilling at a cafe running a pop quiz game. Hachiman decides to crash their vibe by sitting down, and Sai casually asks if he's there to study with them. That question alone exposes the fact that the girls never actually invited him, making him feel like a complete third wheel. Yui then notices a flyer in his hand, and he reveals it's his research on summer prep programs. He admits he's trying to land a scholarship for cram school because he's flat broke and he wants to get a head start. Right then, his sister Komachi shows up with some guy, and they all squeeze in together for introductions. After Komachi introduces herself, the dude with her reveals he's Taishi, and he attends the same cram school as Komachi. He also drops that his older sister goes to the same high school as them, and that sister happens to be none other than Saki. They all unanimously agree that Saki radiates scary energy and has zero friendliness to offer, and to make it worse, she's been stirring up trouble lately. Taishi adds that she used to be genuinely sweet, but the moment she hit high school, she flipped into full delinquent mode. He also mentions that she comes home crazy late, sometimes at the crack of dawn, and he's begging them to do something about it. Since Saki shares a class with Hachiman, Yukino agrees to take the case as it fits squarely within the Volunteers Club's lane. Later, they hold a proper club meeting where Yukino pitches using animal therapy to crack Saki open. They plant a stray cat in a box outside school, banking on Saki stumbling across it. She then tells everyone else to disappear, and the second they're gone, Yukino starts going feral, playing with the cat herself. Suddenly, Hachiman materializes behind her and asks what she's up to, and instead of flinching, she coldly tells him to get lost. Right then, Hachiman gets a text from Taishi, warning him the whole plan is dead on arrival because Saki is allergic to cats. In the end, they rope in Shizuka to go confront Saki directly while they observe from a safe distance. She asks Saki why she's been dragging herself home so late, but Saki tells her to mind her business because she's not hurting anybody. However, Yukino warns her she's going to start looking like some dirty street corner girl if she keeps this up, and her parents won't be thrilled. In retaliation, Saki claps back at Shizuka by pointing out she has no business giving parenting advice when she's still single and her Kit Kat is collecting dust. Hearing that, Shizuka drops to her knees sobbing and shuffles away, muttering that she desperately needs someone to wife her up. Later, while the squad brainstorms how to get through to Saki, Yui suggests hitting her with love. While Saki is posted up at the parking lot about to dip, they send Hayato over to shoot his shot. Saki blanks him and tries to leave, but Hayato locks in with full Sigma energy and tells her only one of them needs to be this uptight right now, and it isn't her. Even that legendary move doesn't land on Saki, and she walks off, leaving his advances in the trash. Hayato trudges back to the squad and gets absolutely clowned on by Hachiman. Right then, Komachi calls to tip him off that Saki got a sketchy phone call from some store owner. Narrowing the search down to 2 remaining locations, the squad pulls up to Maid Cafe Angel, and since none of them have set foot in one before, Hachiman summons the patron saint of degenerates, Yoshiteru. Since the cafe is a boys-only zone, they file inside while the girls take an alternate route. Shortly after, Yui materializes in a maid outfit, and Hachiman's jaw hits the floor. However, Yoshiteru declares she has no maid soul, and Sai would genuinely eat her alive in this role. Then, Yukino appears in a maid outfit too, and announces that Saki isn't employed here because her name is nowhere on the roster. That leaves them with the final location, a hotel perched on top of a massive building. The hotel has a strict dress code, so Hachiman, Yui, and Yukino pull up looking like they raided a fashion show. They ride the elevator to the top floor and step into a glittering bar, and standing right behind the counter is Saki herself. They're dressed so far outside their usual fits that she doesn't even clock who they are at first. After the reveal, Saki asks the girls if they're on a 3-way date with Mr. Background Character over here, and Yukino says she'd sooner delete herself than let him anywhere near her. Hachiman tells Saki her little brother has been losing sleep over her late-night disappearing balancing acts, but she tells them to keep their noses out of her life. That's when Yukino drops the truth bomb. She's too young to legally work these hours, which means she almost certainly lied about her age to get hired. Yui asks her what's worth gambling this much for just one job, and Saki reluctantly admits she's seriously strapped for cash. Yukino says she gets the struggle, but this isn't the move, and Saki fires back that Yukino's dad is swimming in generational wealth and she wouldn't recognize struggle if it slapped her. The tension between the girls spikes, and Hachiman suggests everyone pump the brakes before this turns into a war zone. As Yui and Yukino head out, Hachiman quietly asks Saki if she'd spare him a few minutes after her shift ends, and she agrees. That morning, Saki walks into the cafe and is immediately greeted by the entire squad, her brother and Komachi, all lined up waiting. Hachiman takes a swing at why she needs the money and pivots toward Taishi, revealing that, just like him, Saki has been gunning for summer courses. Saki confesses she wants to get into college on scholarship and refuses to put that weight on her parents, and that's the real reason she's been ghosted this whole time. Komachi then fills them in that since both their parents clock out late, Saki used to be stuck home alone every day after school. But once Hachiman caught on, he started coming home early enough that she'd never have to walk into an empty house. Her point is that by trying not to burden her parents, Saki accidentally piled everything onto her little brother by grinding night shifts. And Komachi gets it on a personal level because she's the younger sibling too. Once it all clicks, Saki realizes what she's done, and the squad gives the siblings space to hash it out themselves. Later, walking home with Komachi, she mentions she had no idea Hachiman was cool with the girl who dropped off those sweets. She then reveals the girl was actually Yui, which hits Hachiman like a truck. A few days after, the school runs its observation tour as scheduled, and once it wraps, Hachiman decides to wander off solo. Then Yui catches up and tells him the rest of the group went to eat, and she's been hanging back, waiting for him this whole time. Hachiman tells her she doesn't have to babysit him just because he saved her dog. He's always been a loner, and that's not changing anytime soon. Yui freezes up and tells him that's not even remotely why she keeps showing up for him. But when Hachiman goes quiet, her eyes well up, and she calls him the worst before sprinting away. She rejoins the group with a smile plastered on that fools absolutely nobody, while Hachiman mutters to himself about how he can't stand sweet girls because even a 5-second conversation makes his heart lose its mind. But he also knows that sweet girls are sweet to everybody, so he's not about to read into it like he's something special. What Hachiman doesn't realize, though, is that for Yui, he absolutely is. 6 a week after everything, Yui is out on a sunrise stroll with her dog, and she can't stop replaying her conversation with Hachiman in her head. The following day, they cross paths at the lockers, and it's painfully obvious that the air between them is thick with awkwardness. Once Yui heads off, Hachiman steps into class and spots her chilling with Yumiko's crew, and a wave of relief hits him knowing he's untangled Yui from her guilt. Their whole dynamic has basically been factory reset, and Hachiman is convinced they can both go on existing in peace from here. Later in the club room, Yukino presses him on whether something went down between him and Yui, but Hachiman just waves it off. But Yukino clocks that Yui hasn't shown up to the club in a whole week and tries to squeeze the truth out of him, yet he keeps insisting nothing happened between them. He also throws in that he and Yui were never close enough to even have a proper argument, so Yukino figures they must have bumped heads over something. Right at that moment, Miss Shizuka walks into the room, clocks that Yui is MIA once again, and looks visibly let down. She drops down next to Hachiman and lets him know she's considering upgrading their little duel into a full-on battle royale. But seeing as there's only 2 of them, Shizuka orders them to go recruit more emotionally stunted background characters so their club can officially become a haven for the socially challenged. Yukino argues that they're actually 3 if you count Yui, but Shizuka fires back that Yui lacks the drive to really belong here, so she might as well bounce. Catching that opening, Hachiman claims he's got zero motivation either and would love to dip, but the second Shizuka cracks her knuckles, he immediately backtracks. So she gives them a mission to rope in at least 1 fresh member by Monday. But Yukino's big brain move is to just re-recruit Yui, since technically she's no longer a member per Miss Shizuka. Hachiman figures if Yui wanted to return, she wouldn't have bounced in the first place. But Yukino's already got a plan brewing around Yui's upcoming birthday. She then starts stumbling over her own words and asks Hachiman to head out with her to pick up a gift for Yui, which catches him completely off guard. However, Hachiman is the undisputed chairman of Virgins, proven by the fact that he dragged his own little sister along just to sabotage any shot he had at getting some waste action. Their original plan is to split up and handle things separately, but Komachi is a firm believer in strength in numbers, so she herds them into exploring the mall as a unit. As they wander through the mall, Komachi pulls a Houdini, and when Hachiman rings her, she claims she's got her own shopping to do, leaving the 2 of them stranded together. In truth, she stitched her dense older brother with Yukino on purpose, so he can maybe get his rod wet. She informs him she won't resurface for at least 5 hours and will link up with them at the very end, which leaves Hachiman fuming. When he relays this to Yukino, she doesn't blame Komachi one bit, since Hachiman dragged her out here on her only day off. She shakes it off and leads the way into a clothing store, and when the women inside start sizing Hachiman up like a criminal, Yukino explains that guys don't usually wander into this section. When Hachiman tries to peace out and wait by the entrance, Yukino tells him he can't just lean on her taste, since her standards are nowhere near a typical high school girl's. Since he'd just be a lost cause wandering these stores solo, she floats the idea of him playing her boyfriend for the day. Hachiman tries to play it cool, even though internally he's absolutely combusting. But Yukino wastes no time knocking him back down to earth. Meanwhile, Yui is at the vet getting her dog groomed, and it hits her that she's completely ghosted both Hachiman and Yukino. She makes up her mind to go sort things out with them, but then she looks around and realizes her dog has vanished. On the other hand, Hachiman and Yukino have hit a wall because Yukino will not stop being an absolute snob about what to get. After going back and forth for a while, the two of them land on grabbing Yui some cozy clothes that actually match her vibe. The moment they finish up their shopping run, Yukino's older sister Haruno materializes out of thin air and immediately assumes Yukino is on a romantic outing. She harasses the two of them relentlessly, and even though they both insist they're not a couple, she keeps the roasting going. Before leaving, she brightly tells Hachiman to shoot his shot with her sister so they can be one big happy family. After she's gone, Hachiman mutters under his breath that all that bubbly energy of hers feels less like a personality and more like a front. Right then, a dog comes barreling over out of nowhere, and Yukino gets so spooked that she essentially glues herself to Hachiman, but the dog hops right into Hachiman's arms and immediately starts going wild with him. As he's trying to work out where the dog even came from, Yui pops up out of nowhere and immediately concludes she's crashed a date. She goes red with embarrassment and starts to slip away, but Yukino catches her and calmly asks her to swing by the service club on Monday so they can actually hash things out. Come Monday, Yui shows back up at the club, fully convinced she's walking in to have it confirmed that Hachiman and Yukino are an item. Hachiman catches on that both of them are completely talking past each other and steps in to kill the confusion, making it crystal clear that he and Yukino are absolutely not a thing. Once that's settled, Yukino genuinely expresses her gratitude for all of Yui's efforts and slides her a birthday present, which instantly lifts the whole atmosphere. Hachiman hands one over as well and brings up the memories they made during the career field trip, straight up telling her he wants her to drop the past and let go of the guilt she's been carrying. Yui admits the whole situation feels too tangled to unpack, but Yukino sets the record straight. Hachiman never acted out of obligation to her, and she never looked at him with sympathy. Yui gets visibly choked up and says she can't stand the thought of losing what they have, but Yukino gently points out that closing one chapter of a relationship often means another one is just getting started. When Yukino steps out, Hachiman hangs back and watches as Yui tears into her gift. Turns out it's a dog collar, and Yui enthusiastically tries it on herself, only to get absolutely clowned when Hachiman reveals it was meant for her pet. She gets all flustered and hurls an insult at him on the way out, but the second she's outside, she's pressed against the door with the biggest grin, relieved that things are finally good between them. Once she's gone, Hachiman reaches over and picks up Yukino's book, sitting in silence as her words echo around in his head. During summer break, Hachiman is deep in a gaming session when a text from Miss Shizuka pops up on his phone. He straight up ignores it though, already cooking up the excuse that his battery was dead the whole time. He figures the trick is bulletproof, since every girl he's ever texted has pulled the exact same stunt on him, but Shizuka refuses to be outsmarted and just bombards him with emails instead. Eventually, he mans up enough to actually read through them and finally cracks the code on why she's perpetually single. Not long after, Komachi bounces in buzzing with energy because she knocked out her summer assignments early, and as her prize, she wants Hachiman to take her out to Chiba. Hachiman barely looks up from his screen and tells her his wallet is running on empty. Komachi clarifies she's not after anything and just wants to spend time together, so Hachiman agrees to roll out as long as she stops dressing like she's filming content for a very specific corner of the internet. After they both swap outfits and head to the station, they randomly bump into Shizuka, who immediately interrogates him about why he's been ghosting her. She then drops that she actually tipped off Komachi to drag him here so she could get to him face to face. Hachiman tries to wriggle out by saying he's headed to Chiba, but Shizuka announces that the whole squad is tagging along, whether he likes it or not. Yui and Yukino then materialize out of nowhere, which tanks his mood instantly, though it recovers slightly when he finds out that Gmail is part of the lineup too. After a couple hours on the road, they pull up to a house that triggers a distant memory of Hachiman visiting this exact spot for some nature studies trip back in the day. Then another whip rose up, and Hayato plus his whole entourage climb out, with Shizuka explaining they've all shown up to volunteer. Later on, the volunteers get formally introduced to the kids taking part in the camp, and while Hayato naturally steps up to lead, Yukino and Hachiman are already side-eyeing each other because teaming up with Hayato's crew sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. Shizuka shuts that down immediately and tells them to figure it out and make it work. After that, the whole group walks the kids into the forest, where Hayato instantly becomes everyone's favorite big brother the moment he rescues the girls from a rat snake. He then clocks a girl hanging back by herself on the sidelines and instantly recognizes the energy. She's got the same social paralysis he did growing up. As the group keeps moving, Hayato notices the same girl drifting away from everyone else again and goes over to ask her name. She tells him she's Rumi, and he casually ropes her in by asking her to help him track down the next checkpoint. Hachiman watches the whole thing play out next to Yukino and low-key respects Hayato's ability to just click with people effortlessly. Yukino, however, is not buying that his approach is actually doing anything, and she's proven dead right when Hayato leaves Rumi right back in the middle of the same girls she's been trying to avoid. A little while later, everyone gathers to start cooking, and Shizuka splits the chores down gender lines. Hachiman quips that she split them up because she's still single and refuses to watch the youngsters catch feelings before she does. After that, everyone pulls together to throw a meal down, vibing with both the little brats and Hayato's crew in the process. Mid-cooking, Hayato drifts over to check in on Rumi, but the other girls immediately start whispering about her the moment his back is turned. It makes Rumi shrink into herself, and she silently walks off without a single word. To everyone else, Rumi reads as cold and unapproachable, but Hachiman sees straight through it. She's just building walls to protect herself from getting humiliated. Rumi ends up migrating over to where Hachiman and Yukino are chilling, and they exchange a couple of words before Yui rolls up and asks why she's not hanging with the rest of the group. Rumi fires back that the other girls are insufferable, and she'd much rather keep to herself, but the two of them nudge her to put herself out there before it becomes a habit she can't shake. All that advice does is make Rumi spiral harder, as it dawns on her that she might just end up a social wreck like Hachiman. That evening at the dinner table, Hayato brings up that Rumi is walling herself off from everyone and floats the idea of stepping in to help her open up. Yukino cuts in and tells Hayato flat out that he doesn't even grasp what's actually going on with Rumi, then pivots to ask Shizuka for the green light to handle it herself. Shizuka tells them to go nuts and then promptly disappears, leaving the group to sit around throwing out ideas on how to actually help Rumi. Everyone starts pitching their thoughts, but then Hina goes completely off script and suggests making Rumi watch Boku no Pico, which sends Yumiko into full drag her out of here mode. On her way out, Yumiko tosses in that Rumi deserves to be a loner since she acts like she's better than everyone, but Yukino claps back that Yumiko's too dense to comprehend anything beyond surface-level emotions. It's about to blow up into a whole thing, but Hayato tells Yumiko to cool it, and she storms off in a huff. That night, Hachiman catches feelings seeing Sai knocked out beside him and dips out of the cabin to go touch grass alone in the woods. That's when he stumbles upon Yukino, softly humming to herself while gazing up at the moon. He asks what she's doing out here this late, and Yukino admits she had another clash with Yumiko and came outside to decompress. She then says she genuinely wants to do something for Rumi, mostly because Hayato can't seem to get the girl off his brain. Hachiman asks why Hayato's feelings are her concern, and Yukino explains it's because the two of them were actually close back in middle school. On top of that, Hayato's dad handles legal affairs for their family's company, meaning their whole friendship was basically engineered by their parents from the start. She then lets it slip that her parents mostly parade Haruno around as their golden child, while she's just a second-rate stand-in. With that off her chest, she turns and walks back into the dark, leaving Hachiman alone in the woods to vibe in peace. The following morning, Hachiman gets roused from sleep by his favorite sissy boy, and spotting him hovering above his face, gets his sausage all fired up. After pulling himself together, he prepares to link up with the group, when out of nowhere, Sai requests his digits so he can hit him up later. Up until this point, Hachiman had only ever touched his phone to set alarms and simp over his favorite pixel babes, so the moment Sai's first text rolls in, he's so overwhelmed with joy that he actually drops. Later, as everyone assembles for breakfast, Shizuka lays out the itinerary for their last day at camp. She tells them they've got to build a bonfire and organize a test of courage activity for the elementary schoolers. This instantly sours Hachiman's mood because it brings back memories of how nobody paired up with him when he attended summer camp here. Noticing the deadpan expression plastered on his face, the crew jokingly throws out that he should play the monster role to terrify the kids, which irritates him even more. Once breakfast wraps up, the group moves out and begins piling up logs for the bonfire. Hachiman is so far gone that he ends up treating the logs like a Jenga tower, and by the time he snaps out of it, the rest of the crew has already wrapped up and bounced. With the task done, Hachiman strolls down to the river to chill out, only to discover Yui and Komachi already posted there, splashing around in the water. Komachi lights up when she spots Hachiman and immediately begs him to hype up her new swimsuit, but Hachiman looks completely unbothered. She then pressures him into gassing up Yui, and he reluctantly admits she's absolutely snatched in that swimwear. Truth be told, he thinks she looks so fire that he literally cannot stop staring, which sends her into a panic trying to rinse her eyes out. While chilling on the riverbank, Hachiman is quickly joined by Yukino and Miss Shizuka, and casually jokes to the latter that she could straight up pass as a stepmom. Shizuka gets so pressed that she clocks him right in the stomach, reminding him that she's barely even hit 30. Right at that moment, Yumiko strolls past and locks eyes with Yukino, making her suddenly self-conscious about her B-cups. But Hachiman waves it off, pointing out that her sister was a late bloomer too, and she'll be stacking G-cups before long. Shortly after, everyone groups up to mess around in the water, while Hachiman parks himself alone in his little corner. Right then, Rumi comes over and questions why he's not out there splashing around with everyone else. Hachiman tells her he forgot to pack his swimsuit and flips the question back at her. Rumi says it's because everyone else ditched her. Right then, Yui appears and invites Rumi to join them in the water, but she turns her down flat. She then turns to Hachiman and asks if he's ever actually had friends, and he says he's been socially broken for as long as he can recall. He tells Rumi to just let go of the whole making friends thing since she'll never see those people again after graduation anyway, and Yukino backs him up. Yui pushes back on both of them, arguing that friendships can actually survive past graduation, but Hachiman hits her with the question of how many classmates she's still actually cool with. When she answers just 2, Hachiman fires up the mental calculator and crunches the numbers, concluding that's under a 1% survival rate for friendships past graduation. He then shrugs it off as irrelevant, but Rumi reveals her mom pressures her into making friends, and even handed her a camera specifically so she could snap group photos. But it quickly becomes clear that Rumi has completely tapped out on the whole friendship thing, and Hachiman dips, quietly cooking up a scheme to help her get her confidence back. Later on, when it's finally time to prep the scare event, the crew suits up in costume and tries to figure out what to do about the entire Rumi situation. Everyone throws out their own takes, but Hachiman tells them he's already got something cooked up. Rather than dressing up as monsters to terrorize the girls, he wants to shatter the phony connections, keeping that group glued together. Hayato pushes back on the idea at first, but once Hachiman breaks down how brutal it is for certain people to squeeze into counterfeit friend groups, he agrees to roll with Hachiman's approach. When the event kicks off, Yumiko and Tobe play the role of bullies, boxing in Rumi's group and doing their best to crank up the discomfort. Right on cue, Hayato rolls in and drops the news that only 3 girls get to stay while the rest are being sent back. The girls instantly throw Rumi's name out as one of the 3 and immediately start bickering over the remaining spots, exposing just how paper-thin their friendships actually are. As the whole thing is winding down, Hachiman is ready to step in and blow the prank wide open, but Yui pulls him back. Right at that moment, in a total power move, Rumi whips out her camera and flashes it straight at the bullies to blind them, leading her group to safety and catching everybody completely off guard. Later that evening, the bonfire blazes bright against the night sky as everyone huddles around. Shizuka and Yukino big up Hachiman for his smart-ass plan, admitting it went way better than any of them anticipated. Even Hayato shows his appreciation, musing out loud about whether things between them could have gone differently if they'd crossed paths back in middle school. Hachiman stays pretty quiet, but he soaks in the warmth of the moment all the same. The following morning, as everyone gets ready to roll out, a sleek black limo pulls up, and Haruno climbs out to collect Yukino. True to form, she messes with both Yukino and Hachiman before nonchalantly dropping that their mother is expecting them. Yukino's face shifts in an instant, making it obvious how much she's not looking forward to heading back home, but she silently climbs into the car alongside her sister. As the limo pulls off, both Hachiman and Yui clock that it's the exact same one that ran him over when he jumped in to save her dog. Yui opens her mouth to bring it up, but Hachiman shuts it down immediately, acting like he has zero memory of it. Deep down though, he knows he remembers every single detail. With summer vacation winding down, Hachiman starts going stir-crazy sitting at home with absolutely nothing happening. To keep himself busy, he tries hanging out with Yui's dog, who he and Komachi have been watching over. Not long after, Yui swings by to pick up her dog, and Komachi suggests she come back and meet their parents, which Yui promptly shuts down. As a thank you move, Yui extends an invite to both Hachiman and Komachi for the fireworks festival coming up. Komachi, though, dead set on getting her hopeless virgin brother some action, declines and instead shoves Hachiman into going with Yui solo, handing him a shopping list that just so happens to be long enough to keep them together the entire day. Come festival day, Hachiman shows up at the station right on time, while Yui rolls in late, looking like an absolute snack. Not wanting to flash her the civil war happening below his waistband, he spins around and quietly tells her she looks pretty good. While waiting for the train, they keep stealing glances at each other, like a pair of awkward disasters, until it finally pulls up. Once on board, they start chatting until the train hits a bump, and Yui stumbles into Hachiman, sending both their faces bright red. Even while keeping his expression dead flat, Hachiman privately confesses he would have totally caught feelings for Yui if he wasn't already down bad for femboys like Sai. When they get off, Hachiman goes ahead and suggests they're too early and should honestly just head back, which sends Yui into a mild spiral. They finally roll up to the fireworks spot, and Hachiman keeps drilling it into his own head that Yui is just a genuinely nice person who probably treats everyone like this, so he seriously needs to chill. As they push through the festival crowd crossing stuff off Komachi's list, they stumble into their classmate Minami and her friends, who immediately hit Yui with light teasing for being seen out with Hachiman. While Yui brushes it off and shoots the breeze with them, Hachiman clocks that the whole situation is only awkward because he's not exactly a prize, and the energy would have been completely flipped if Hayato had shown up with her instead. Not trying to drag Yui through any more secondhand embarrassment, he slips off to grab her favorite snack, and when she eventually tracks him down, he calmly asks if she feels like picking up some candy apples. Once the fireworks kick off, the two start hunting for a solid spot to settle in, and Hachiman finds himself wishing he'd remembered to pack a mat for them. Yui is shook that he's actually this considerate and starts hyping him up for it, but dude immediately tanks the moment by spiraling into a deep pool of self-reflection. Moving further in, they end up crossing paths with Haruno, who pulls them into the VIP section because she's out there repping her dad. Chilling with her, they take in the fireworks while getting into how they each personally relate to Yukino. Haruno low-key clowns on Yui and Hachiman for sneaking around behind Yukino's back, but he's quick to clear up that he's not with Yukino and definitely not getting with Yui. The convo drifts to Yui and how she's basically been trailing Haruno's blueprint ever since she was a little kid. Haruno then asks Yui for her honest take on Yukino, and Yui goes full simp mode, saying she adores Yukino for being warm, real, and fearless. Haruno claps back that everyone starts out feeling exactly the same, but they all end up shutting Yukino out because of envy. Hearing that, Yui drops the lighthearted act completely and goes dead serious, swearing she'd never walk out on Yukino. After the show wraps, Haruno casually offers to drop them home in her limo, tossing in that the car doesn't have a single mark left from the crash. But since it's literally the same limo that mowed Hachiman down, both he and Yui feel weird about it and politely pass, even while Hachiman insists none of it bothers him. On the walk home, Yui asks whether Yukino has ever brought up the accident with him, and Hachiman says nah, guessing it's something Yukino would rather leave alone. Yui then floats the idea of all three of them getting even closer, and tosses in that she genuinely thinks she and Hachiman would have become friends, even if the dog incident had never gone down. Hachiman softly pushes back on that, not really buying that it would have played out that way. Right as Yui starts steering the conversation towards something more vulnerable, her phone buzzes. Even though she clearly still has things to say, Hachiman nudges her to answer it, and she takes off. The next day, school fires back up, and Hachiman bumps into Yukino on the staircase. She casually lets him know that Haruno already snitched about running into him and Yui at the festival. She's visibly winding up to say something heavy, but before she gets there, Hachiman cuts in and asks if the club is back in action. Yukino quietly says yes, and the two of them drift off in opposite directions. Walking away, Hachiman thinks about how he constantly tries to sell himself on the idea that Yukino is always honest, but somewhere under all that, he knows it's just the version of her he wants to see. Like anyone else, she's more than capable of lying too, and sitting with that reality leaves him feeling bitter at himself for chasing that illusion this whole time. The following morning, Yui walks into the volunteers club room and immediately picks up on the suffocating tension floating around in there. She makes an attempt to chat with both Yukino and Hachiman, but neither of them can be bothered to even slightly engage. Later that same day, Shizuka taps Hachiman to serve as the boys' rep for the cultural festival coming up. Then comes the part where they need to pick a girl's representative, but since absolutely no girl is rushing to partner up with a guy who looks like a creepy degenerate, the room stays dead quiet. Right in the middle of that suffocating silence, Minami casually elbows Yui and floats the idea of her stepping up, since they're supposedly an item. Yui gets completely blindsided and nervously clarifies that they are very much not dating. That's when Hayato swoops in and points out that the role needs someone magnetic enough to actually pull crowds, so Yui would be way better suited running the sales floor. He then turns to Minami and asks her to be the girls' rep instead, and although she pushes back initially, She quickly clocks that her internal sprinkler system fires up every time Hayato so much as looks at her, so she caves and takes the job. Shortly after, a meeting gets called with all the festival reps gathered in one room. Meguri, repping the student council, drops that they're going to need someone to step into the executive chair for the whole event. Everyone goes quiet, so Meguri softly brings up how Haruno once ran the festival flawlessly, a pretty transparent nudge aimed directly at Yukino. Yukino, however, shuts it down flat and volunteers only as a standard committee member. After an awkward stretch of silence, Minami timidly raises her hand and offers to take the seat if nobody else is stepping up. She introduces herself to the room, says she's looking to level up personally, and also casually mentions she's trying to expand her OnlyFans clientele. Once the meeting breaks up, everyone reconvenes back in the clubroom. Yui tries her hardest to keep the vibe alive, but Hachiman and Yukino both look completely hollowed out, like two people who've checked out of existence. Yui brings up how caught off guard she was seeing Yukino show up to the meeting, and Yukino fires back in the most robotic, lifeless voice imaginable. Things get weirder still when Yukino casually drops that the Volunteers Club is going on ice, while everyone redirects energy toward the festival. Hachiman shrugs it off like it means nothing, and Yui just sits there, watching the two of them radiate rock-bottom energy. Hachiman is mid-exit when the door flies open and Minami rolls in with her whole crew. She explains that Shizuka pointed her toward the Volunteers Club as a place to get backup for student projects, and asks if they'd support her in the executive position. Yukino, against all odds, agrees, even though she literally just froze all club operations 2 seconds ago. After Minami and her group clear out, Yui wheels around and asks Yukino why she just said yes when she had barely finished announcing the club was on pause. Yukino clarifies that she's stepping in for Minami personally, not under the club's banner, and explains she's got the experience to handle it more cleanly flying solo. That answer does not sit right with Yui, and she storms straight out of the club room. Hachiman clocks the frustration on her face and asks what her deal is. She finally lets it out. She can't stand how off Yukino has been behaving lately, and how quickly she caved to helping Minami. Then she goes quiet for a beat, before softly admitting she cares about Yukino way more than she even realized. With a dead serious expression, she tells Hachiman to stick by Yukino's side and not bail on her no matter what. Since Yui is basically in his face about it, Hachiman agrees just to get some breathing room when honestly, he wants absolutely no part of any of this. Later, Hachiman sits in on the committee meeting and watches Yukino running the entire show while Minami fumbles to keep pace beside her. It doesn't take long before the other members start murmuring amongst themselves that Yukino is clearly the one built for the top role, and that Minami is just dead weight holding her back. Minami catches the whispers and visibly starts cracking under the weight. Meanwhile, back in class, Hachiman's homeroom decides to stage a play for the festival. Hina jumps on it immediately, using the whole thing as cover to push her personal fantasy of shipping Hachiman and Hayato together. Refusing to be dragged into that circus, Hachiman announces he's into femboys and dips, citing committee work as his excuse. Out in the corridor, he walks into a whole situation where Meguri is trying to rope Haruno into performing at the festival. When Haruno swings the question over to Yukino for input, Yukino icily tells her to do whatever she feels like. Right then, Minami appears on the scene, and Haruno instantly flips a switch, trading her cold energy for full charm mode as she sweetly asks Minami to join the event. Completely disarmed by Haruno's warmth, Minami agrees without hesitation. Haruno then drifts over to Hachiman and quips that she never pegged him for someone who'd end up wrapped up in something like this. Hachiman fires back that she probably didn't picture Yukino in this either, but Haruno just smirks and says Yukino has always mirrored whatever she does, especially when it comes to being the one in charge. As the meetings stack up, Hachiman watches Haruno and Minami gradually dump the entire workload directly onto Yukino's plate. Days tick by, and Yukino is still out here grinding through most of it completely alone. One afternoon, Hayato strolls in and clocks Yukino and Hachiman deep in the work. He casually remarks that Yukino looks like she's carrying the whole thing by herself. Yukino brushes it off and says it's just faster this way, but Hayato tells her straight up that if she keeps refusing to delegate, the whole operation is going to implode at some point. Then the next morning hits, and Shizuka rolls in with news. She tells Hachiman and the others that Yukino won't be showing up today because she's sick. Meanwhile, Hayato is running lines for the play with his new lead, Sai, while Hina hovers over them like a hawk. She tells the guys to bring more intensity to the scene, and the moment they do, she gets a nosebleed and hits the floor. Meanwhile, Minami is busy doing absolutely nothing productive when Yui gets a call from Hachiman telling her that Yukino is a no-show today. After school, Hachiman and Yui head over to Yukino's place to check up on her and are floored to find out she lives in a massive building. They buzz her through the intercom, and Yukino is not exactly thrilled about letting them in. That is, until Hachiman tells her to quit acting like a little bichon. Yukino eventually opens the door and lets them inside, wearing a gloomy expression on her face. After they settle in, Yui kicks off the conversation by asking if she's alright, and Yukino claims she's totally fine. Watching her brush it off so easily gets Yui heated, and she starts going off on both Yukino and Hachiman for refusing to work together. Yukino maintains that she's handling things fine, but Hachiman tells her flat out that her approach is all wrong and she needs to start asking for help. Finally, Yui softly tells her that she just wants Yukino to lean on them more, and Yukino barely says a word back. She comes back shortly after with tea for everyone, but Hachiman makes up his mind to bounce the second it's done. Yui, visibly awkward, chooses to head out with him as well, but while she's slipping her shoes on, Yukino tells her that someday she'll learn to depend on her. The following day, back at the committee meeting, the group throws around potential slogans for the cultural festival. Minami tosses out a fuzzy idea about unity for everyone, but Hachiman sarcastically shuts it down and pitches his own suggestion. Minami then writes the word friendship on the board, and Hachiman practically dies of secondhand embarrassment. She clocks this and asks whether he's always this unpleasant or just specifically making faces at her. He fires back that he hates the idea and proposes using the kanji for human instead, noting how the character resembles two people holding each other up, just like how half the committee freeloads off the other half and still plays the victim. His brutal honesty gets him a room full of dirty looks, but Yukino catches the real message underneath and starts fake laughing to cut the tension. Shizuka then nudges him to elaborate, and he obliges, going in on every single person who's been coasting and dumping their work on everyone else. Eventually, Yukino proposes wrapping up the meeting since nobody's brought anything useful to the table, and reconvening the next day with fresh ideas. Once everyone clears out, Yukino catches up with Hachiman in the hallway, where they go back and forth in friendly banter over his ridiculous proposal. Yukino then turns to leave and gives him a little wave goodbye, which brings out a soft smile from Hachiman. The day after, the committee locks in a slogan and kicks into gear, with everybody actually showing up and putting in real effort. While Minami can barely keep pace, Yukino steps up and takes the wheel, dishing out clear and decisive instructions. Haruno tracks Hachiman down later and highlights how his remarks turned him into the group's villain, which ironically lit a fire under everyone to work harder just to prove him wrong. Hachiman figures that Haruno being around serves the exact same purpose, pushing Yukino's buttons just enough to make her go even harder. When the festival kicks off, Minami's total lack of prep is on full display as she fumbles her way through the opening speech. Later, Hachiman swings by to catch Hina's class performance, and watching Sai up on stage makes him wish he hadn't bailed. Shockingly, the play ends up being a massive hit, with the entire audience sobbing over the tearjerker ending. Afterward, Yui tracks Hachiman down at the info desk and shows up with lunch, and as they settle in together, they catch sight of complete mayhem breaking out in the hallways. Right on cue, Yukino rolls up with her crew and shuts the whole situation down. The two of them watch and start chatting about Yukino, and Yui mentions that she's made up her mind to wait for Yukino. She then looks over at Hachiman and tells him she wouldn't do that for just anyone, and that sometimes going for it first is totally valid. Hachiman gets a bit thrown off, and she pivots by pulling out his lunch, which happens to be a honey toast. The two of them dig in together and eat until they're completely satisfied. When Hachiman tries to pay her back for the meal, Yui waves it off, but when he pushes, she slyly drops that a date might be a more fitting form of repayment. Blindsided, Hachiman clocks what she's getting at and completely short-circuits. After he agrees, she tells him to name a day, but Hachiman says he'll circle back on that. Meanwhile, Minami, crushed by shame over how little she's contributed, retreats to the bathroom and locks herself inside. As Hachiman steps into the role of cameraman, Komoachi suddenly throws her arms around him from behind. When she finds out that her deadbeat brother is actually doing something useful for once, she bursts into happy tears. After she walks away all smiles, Hachiman goes back to snapping photos until his gaze lands on Yukino's. They agree to take a stroll together, and Yukino reveals she's on her way to the final meeting for the closing ceremony. They make their way to the auditorium, where Haruno is putting on a mesmerizing performance, completely stealing the crowd's attention. Right then, a committee member pulls Yukino aside to go backstage, and once she gets there, she finds out that Minami has gone completely ghost. Yukino says swapping her out won't be a problem, but the real issue is that only Minami has the voting results for the awards. Hachiman throws out the idea of just fabricating new ones, and even though it's a shady move, nobody can really argue that it isn't a solid plan. When Hayato catches wind of it, he offers to buy time by performing another song with his band, and asks Yumiko if she's down to help. She shoots it down at first, but then she recalls what he's working with, so she agrees to jump in with some personal incentives in mind. Hayato then warns them they've only got 10 minutes to track her down, so Yukino decides to stretch that window to boost their chances of finding her. She immediately pulls Haruno backstage, who is caught off guard since this is literally the first time Yukino has ever reached out to her for anything. Haruno proudly declares she's on board, but Yukino makes it clear that this is for the committee, not for her. Still, she admits she'll owe her one if she comes through, because she never accepts favors from anyone, and that alone makes Hachiman feel a quiet sense of pride. Yukino then rallies the band, tapping Yui as a lead vocalist, Shizuka on guitar, and Meguri on piano. Yui is visibly thrilled to have Yukino personally asking for her help, and jumps at the chance without hesitation. With everything squared away, Hachiman heads out to track down Minami, and Yukino puts her full trust in him to get it done. He steps out and racks his brain over where she could possibly be, eventually narrowing it down to the rooftop. And sure enough, he finds Minami up there completely alone and breaks it to her that they're stalling the entire closing ceremony because of her disappearance. She snaps back and tells him to just have Yukino handle it, but Hachiman reminds her that she's the only one sitting on those voting results. Minami tells him to grab the results and get out of her face, but he doesn't budge because Yukino trusted him to bring her back. After carefully turning his words over in his head, he gears up to say something, but right at that moment, Hayato and the whole crew suddenly appear on the rooftop. They all ease up and calmly ask her to come back down, and while she seems tempted to go along, she still holds back, insisting that she's just not cut out for this. Eventually, Hachiman decides to go full villain mode and tells her straight up that she's hopeless and just wants to be coddled. He lays it out in front of everyone that Minami has just been chasing Yukino's image, craving the recognition and validation she gets, when the reality is she simply isn't on her level. As Hachiman keeps digging into her, the weight of his words starts crushing Minami until Hayato grabs him by the collar and slams him against the wall. The girls tell Hayato to drop him and walk off with Minami, tossing insults at Hachiman on the way out. Hayato lingers for a second, asking him why he always has to go about things this way, before finally taking off. Hachiman then sits alone on the roof, listening to the music drifting up from the auditorium as Yui and the others take the stage. Once that wraps up, Minami steps onto the stage and stumbles through a shaky speech. Afterward, she ends up sobbing backstage, and the whole group puts the blame squarely on Hachiman for going in on her so hard. Right then, Haruno appears and low-key congratulates him for being the necessary villain that made the whole thing come together. After she heads off, Shizuka softly presses her hand to his cheek and gently tells him he doesn't need to keep torturing himself just to bail everyone else out. Hachiman brushes it off and says it doesn't faze him, but she tells him that watching him suffer is painful for the people who actually care about him. That night, Hachiman makes his way to the club room and walks in to find Yukino already there. She asks him what it feels like to be the most hated person in the room, and Hachiman deadpans that being seen and recognized by everyone feels absolutely incredible. After a bit of playful back and forth, Yukino mentions she came to write a report, and Hachiman says he's there for the exact same reason. She jokingly quips that great minds operate on the same frequency, but Hachiman shuts that down immediately, insisting they are nothing alike. After sitting with his thoughts for a moment, he asks her if she'd want to be friends, but she shuts him down on the spot, saying there's no way they could ever be buddies. Just then, Yui pops in and calls them both out to join the after party, but Hachiman declines, well aware his reputation is already in the gutter. In the end, Yui skips the party altogether and just hangs back with them in the club room. As the three of them chat, Hachiman lands on the conclusion that life doesn't come with a rewind button, and that certain moments slip away forever, even the seemingly meaningless ones, like killing time in the service club. He figures there's a real chance he'll end up missing even these moments once they're gone. A few days later, the club receives an email from an anonymous sender who wants to hype up the upcoming sports festival, especially since it'll be the last one before they graduate. The message gets Yukino, Yui, and Hachiman all up in their feelings about how they personally feel toward the event. Yukino flat out admits she's never been a fan of the sports festival, and both Yui and Hachiman immediately back her up, confessing they're just not built for anything sports-related anyway. While the conversation is still going, the club room door suddenly flies open, and Meguri walks in wearing her signature bright grin. She drops the bombshell that she's actually the one behind the email. She goes on to explain that After watching the cultural festival come together so well, she wants that same level of hype and good vibes carried into the sports festival. Mid-conversation, Meguri blanks on who Hachiman even is, which hands Yukino the perfect opening to roast him by calling him completely unforgettable in the worst way. But right as Hachiman's face sours, Meguri snaps back and says she remembers now. He's the guy who pulled a ton of weight during the cultural festival. Once the compliments die down, Meguri admits she's over the same recycled sports events and practically begs the club to bail her out. They agree to help, and Meguri drags them into a sit-down with the planning committee, where Shizuka is already planted and waiting. She then reveals that she's the one who nudged Meguri to reach out to them to begin with. The crew starts firing off ideas, but Shizuka keeps shooting them down without mercy. Fed up, but not giving up, Hachiman decides to bring in some reinforcements. He rings up Yoshiteru and Hina, banking on their unhinged energy to cook up something actually worth doing. Before long, the whole gang dives headfirst into prepping for the big day. When the sports festival finally rolls around, the girls roll up to their event, rocking fun costumes that Sai put together. The atmosphere is electric, and after a whole lot of chaos and effort, the red team takes the win in the girls' competition, sending Meguri completely over the moon. Next on the agenda is the boys' pole toppling showdown. The teams are divided into white and red. Hayato commands the white side, while Sai leads the charge for red. Hachiman and Yoshiteru, both repping red, cook up a slick strategy to secure the win. Hachiman plays decoy to pull everyone's focus, while Yoshiteru slips through the madness and sends the enemy pole crashing down. The plan goes off without a hitch, and the red team loses their minds celebrating until they get hit with a disqualification for unsportsmanlike conduct. After everything settles down, the three club members drift back to their usual spot and decompress over how the day went. Even though it wasn't exactly flawless, they all land on the same page that it was easily one of the more memorable things they've been a part of. Riding that good energy, they kick around ideas for what to pull off next, feeling genuinely pumped about everything still ahead of them this year. With the cultural and athletic festivals now done, the school reset to factory mode, and Hachiman's leave-me-alone attitude is fully operational as always. Fast forward to class, Hachiman was deep in his zone-out era when Yui randomly popped a question about showing up to the clubroom. Once he admits he has no better options, she bolts immediately before anyone can catch her hanging with a walking red flag like him. Not long after, Sai rolls up to Hachiman and drops the fun fact that literally everyone except him has already locked down a group for the school trip. Taking pity on the poor guy, Hachiman offered him a spot in his squad, and Sai jumped on it without hesitation. Over on the other side, Hayato linked back up with his crew in class, who were visibly pressed about something. They clown him for ghosting the group just to hit the bathroom, roasting him by asking if he was out here doing a Hachiman impression. Later on, Yukino and Yui are posted up in the clubroom sipping tea and debating whether Kyoto is even worth the hype as a school trip destination. Hachiman cuts in and announces that they're completely missing the whole point of school trips, which is basically a training run for becoming soulless office drones. Yukino claps back by telling him his take on school trips is trash, then rattles off a bunch of spots she's already got on her Kyoto hit list. Mid-conversation, Hayato strolls in with Tobe in tow and declares that his right-hand man is in desperate need of some guidance. Tobe proceeds to lose it, screaming that he'd sooner put his faith in a vehicle with no brakes than hand it over to Hachiman. Fair argument aside, Yukino tells both of them to see themselves out and stop burning through the club's valuable hours. Hachiman starts heading for the door, assuming he's included, but she barks at him to park himself like a drooling dog waiting for a snack. She then kicks Hayato and his attached barnacle out, noting that they apparently left their common decency at the door. Hayato says sorry, and just as they're heading out, Tobe overshares and reveals he's planning to shoot his shot with Ebina, but is terrified of eating a rejection to the face. Yui, being her bubbly self, thinks it'd be a great line on her resume, while Yukino flat out tells them it's a pointless endeavor. She then shoots Hachiman the classic, "your turn to weigh in" stare, and he internally questions why this decision is landing on his lap. After getting absolutely harassed by Tobe and Yui for a solid few minutes, the group caves and agrees to help, asking what exactly they're supposed to do. Tobe declares he'll handle the main act himself, since he's basically a certified smooth talker, but he needs the crew to run backup. Hachiman then launches into a breakdown of the highs and lows of confessing to someone, complete with some deeply scarring flashback footage. He doesn't even get to wrap up before Hayato cuts him off and tells him to keep the speech for someone who needs it, since Tobe isn't rocking the same girl-repelling aura that he does. After that, Hayato dipped for practice, leaving Tobe behind with a trio of overthinkers to figure something out. Yukino proposes that they start by mapping out Tobe's strongest qualities, but Tobe drops the bombshell that his number one asset is riding Hayato's coattails, which catches Yui completely off guard. The group figured they'd just dig up the info themselves, since their client was dumber than a wet rock. Yukino settled on calling Tobe lively as the most diplomatic way to dodge saying what everyone was actually thinking. Moving on, Yukino inquires about how Ebina views Tobe, and Yui figures she probably sees him as a decent dude. As Hachiman silently preps a eulogy for Tobe's doomed love life, Tobe is over the moon about being labeled a nice guy. Once Tobe bounces, Yui starts recalibrating their strategy to make the school trip the backdrop for the confession, only for Ebina to walk in and say hey to the group. Ebina drops that she's looking for some assistance in fixing the vibe within her friend group. Turns out, Tobe's constant trash talk directed at Hachiman has been cracking her friend circle down the middle, and she just wants the peace restored. As Yukino probes her for a game plan, Yui just throws out that she should let the guys do their thing. Turning to Hachiman, Ebina says she's happy he's finally showing up on the map, but needs him to pull off something special during the upcoming trip. With that, Ebina exits and leaves the three of them staring into the void with absolutely zero answers. Hachiman cuts through the quiet by summing up their job as just getting everyone to coexist, and Yui asks him how boys actually manage that. Yukino chimes in and says it's honestly borderline torture to be throwing questions at him that are so far out of his lane. The trip day finally rolls around, and despite Yui's best efforts to engineer a Tobe-Ebina seating situation, their nosy friends trash the whole setup, leaving the groupless losers to fight over whatever's left. Hachiman gets stuck sitting beside Sai, who immediately crashes out. Yui pops up not long after to report that Tobe has zero opportunity to make his move on the train with all those people around. Hachiman, completely unbothered, mutters that Tobe couldn't score a point even in an empty room. Sai, who was clearly playing dead this whole time, springs awake and enthusiastically gestures toward Mount Fuji. Yui, intrigued, stretches over to get a look, but almost suffocates Hachiman with her chest in the process. Once she's gone, Hachiman lets out a breath, only to clock that things are now weirdly tense with Sai and immediately say sorry. The second they touch down in Kyoto, Yui grabs Hachiman and hauls him along, reminding him they've got a job to do and it involves getting Tobe near Ebina. She then throws out the idea of breaking into duos so Tobe can get some quality time in with Ebina. From a distance, Yui and Hachiman observe Tobe putting in absolutely embarrassing levels of effort to win Ebina over. Later on, Yui extends a cup she's already sipped from toward Hachiman, and he turns it down flat, saying he'd sooner make out with a damp sneaker. Later that evening at the lodge, Hachiman heads to grab something to drink and stumbles upon Yukino, who bailed from her room after becoming the centerpiece of a full-blown gossip session. He runs her through the latest update on their covert operation, and she says sorry for being MIA, given that they're in different classes. Mid-conversation, they both catch Shizuka attempting a sneaky exit from the building. To make sure her late-night adventure stays under wraps, Shizuka recruits them as cover and treats them to food in exchange for keeping their mouths shut. Once Shizuka ditches them, Hachiman escorts Yukino back to the hotel, but she hangs back a few paces, keeping a healthy buffer between herself and her walking catastrophe of a companion. Hachiman nudges her to close the gap, but she fires back that being seen near him could do serious damage to her image. Following a completely forgettable first day on the trip, Hachiman wakes up at midnight to some dude's face all up in his personal space. He had just barely escaped Dream Komachi making his life miserable, and now he's nose deep in a different kind of nightmare. On day 2, the students descend on a haunted house, and while they wander around inside, Tobe latches onto Hayato, just like the other terrified girls, while Ebina stands there, enjoying the show. Trailing behind them, Yui and Saki glue themselves to Hachiman, who casually drops that living people freak him out way more than any ghost ever could. Out of nowhere, one of the haunted house actors launches at the group, and everyone collectively loses their composure. Saki sprints away in full panic mode, and Sai immediately chases after her. Meanwhile, Yui headbutts Hachiman square in the jaw with her solid skull and hits him with a sorry. Playing the gentleman card, Hachiman pulls her back onto her feet and they bounce. After that, the gang wanders through a few more spots, and Hachiman stumbles across Yukino hanging with her class and admiring some garden featuring a tiger cub crossing. She waves him down while puzzling over which section of the garden is supposed to represent tigers, and Hachiman mentally wonders why this girl is so unhinged about cats. Mid-conversation, Yui and the rest of their crew roll up, and Yukino pulls her teammates away for a private debrief. Yukino checks in on how the mission is progressing, and they fill her in that it's nowhere near as smooth as they expected since they're trying not to spook Ebina by going too hard. While Hachiman internally tries to decode why Hayato has been off lately, Yukino apologizes for being locked out of actually contributing to the request. She does, however, slide them a curated list of prime proposal-worthy locations across Kyoto. Later that same day, Hachiman crosses paths with Yumiko at a convenience store, where she wastes no time telling him she can smell that he and his little girlfriend squad are cooking something up. She then tells him to pump the brakes, filling him in on how Ebina had already torpedoed all her previous attempts to set her friends up with guys. Wrapping up her rant, Yumiko makes it clear she's perfectly happy with how her friend group is right now and doesn't want anyone shaking the table. Hachiman hits her back by telling her to relax since Tobe's already got the whole thing under control. The following morning, Ebina corners Hachiman and asks him how things are coming along with what she requested. Hachiman tells her to stop stressing since the boys are all vibing just fine with each other. Ebina shuts that down by saying it doesn't mean anything until she witnesses it with her own eyes, and Hachiman tells her to keep her eyes peeled during their Arashiyama outing. Shortly after, Hachiman and his girlfriends set off on a little Kyoto exploration walk. Mid-stroll, Yui goes absolutely feral on some snacks, prompting Yukino to ask if she's carving up for some kind of race. Yui then clocks that she's been hauling way too much food for a casual walk and holds out a half-eaten snack to Hachiman, who internally questions why she keeps running this indirect kiss bit on him. The trio then swing by one of the spots on Yukino's list and collectively agree it's got exactly the right atmosphere for Tobe to shoot his shot. Back on the other side, Tobe is completely spiraling ahead of the confession, while his NPC companions stress over their boy ditching them for a girl. As Hachiman and Sai watch the train wreck unfold, Hayato shows up to pump his hype man up, only to be visibly let down watching him dissolve like forgotten ice cream on hot pavement. Later, Hachiman pulls Hayato aside and gets into it with him, trying to crack the code on his weird energy. He straight up calls Hayato out for being a quiet obstacle to the whole proposal going through. Hayato then lays out his anxiety about what Tobe's confession could do to their whole friend group dynamic, since Ebina clearly wasn't on the same page. Hachiman fires back that it's a selfish stance, and argues that a friendship held together by avoiding something this minor isn't worth preserving anyway. At his wit's end, Hayato tells Hachiman he just doesn't want anything to shift, and reluctantly puts it on him to keep the status quo intact. Later on, at the spot the group had scouted for the big moment, everyone crouched down to spy on Tobe, delivering what he believed were earth-shattering lines to Ebina. While hanging around waiting for her to arrive, Tobe gets ambushed by Hachiman, who poses the question of what he'd do if she shot him down. Thrown off by the curveball, Tobe fired back that he wasn't the kind of guy to fold that easily. Hachiman wished him luck and slipped away to crouch back down with his fellow undercover operatives. He then quietly informs Yui and Yukino that Toby isn't walking away with a win tonight, but he's already figured out how to keep everything from falling apart. Shortly after, Ebina shows up, and Tobe completely blanks on how to get the words out. While the awkward silence stretched on, Hachiman figured out the only move that could actually give everyone what they needed, and casually walked straight up to Ebina and dropped a fake confession on her, leaving both Tobe and the crew absolutely blindsided. Ebina, however, shot him down without blinking, and declared that not even the anime gods could drag her into a relationship before running off. Tobe then turns to thank Hachiman for jumping on that grenade for him, while Hayato and the rest of the crew wander over. Still, Tobe swears his feelings aren't going anywhere and heads off with his boys, who are already working to lift his spirits. Hayato then drops a quiet apology to Hachiman for putting the ugly job on him before disappearing from the scene. Meanwhile, Yukino makes zero effort to hide how much she hates Hachiman's method of handling problems and storms off. Then, while Yui walks alongside him, she figures out he has no intention of reflecting on what went down. So she rips into him for being completely blind to how his choices land on the people who actually give a damn about him. The next day, Ebina catches Hachiman and thanks him for saving her friendship with the guys, since she already knew that going the relationship route was a disaster waiting to happen for both of them. She then flips the switch and teases him, floating the idea that the two of them might actually stand a shot together. After the school trip wraps up, Hachiman frowns, and Komachi clocks it immediately over breakfast and asks what's going on. Hachiman plays dumb and tries to spin it into something smart, but Komachi isn't buying it for a second and asks straight up if he's had a falling out with Yui and Yukino. Once she sees she's landed on something, Komachi tells him to go ahead and walk her through what he screwed up this time. Hachiman then zones back to the proposal night and snaps at Komachi, telling her she's being a whole lot right now. That does it for Komachi, who gets properly heated and heads out to school without another word. Meanwhile, back at school, Hayato's whole squad is carrying on like absolutely nothing went down, while Hachiman just sort of existed in the background like a piece of forgotten furniture. The only person who seemed to register that Hachiman was even alive was Sai, somehow. After that, Hachiman drags himself to the volunteer clubroom, and his arrival immediately vacuumed all the good energy out of the space. Yui tries to crack things open by bringing up everything that went down recently, but Hachiman shuts it down and suggests they all just act like nothing happened. Fed up with his thick skull, Yukino asks Hachiman point blank if he plans on ever evolving, and he tunes her out completely, which somehow makes her even more furious. Shizuka then walks in and announces she's hauling in a fresh assignment for them, fully expecting some enthusiasm. Instead, she scans the room and asks, what the hell is going on in here? Hachiman tells her everything's fine and asks what kind of job she's dragging them into this time. Out of nowhere, Meguri and Iroha roll into the club room and drop a request for the club to help Iroha tank the upcoming student council president election, which she has zero desire to win but got dragged into anyway. Hachiman tells her to just crash out of the election if she doesn't want the role, but Meguri shoots that down by pointing out she's literally the only name on the ballot. After sitting with that, Hachiman floats the idea of tanking the election by having someone deliver such a catastrophically bad campaign speech that it triggers a full vote of no confidence. Yukino immediately goes off on him, arguing that the plan is nowhere near foolproof and will most likely blow back directly on Iroha. She counters by proposing they track down someone who actually wants the gig and throw their full weight behind getting that person elected. Hachiman fires back that if anyone was actually interested, they would have already put their hand up, while Yui throws out the idea of just going around and asking people if they want to be student council president. Shizuka then steps in and tells them to table it for another day, since the room was already on the verge of becoming a war zone. Once Meguri and Iroha clear out, Yukino turns to Shizuka and asks her which one of them is closer to snagging the title of Best Problem Solver in the room. Shizuka sidesteps it entirely by announcing there's no winner to declare since they're all gifted in their own completely different ways. After a whole back and forth about whether anyone should be copying anyone else's playbook, Hachiman storms out of the room in a full mood. Shizuka trails him out and tells him straight that if he refuses to shift his approach, he might just end up helping nobody at all. After school, Hachiman spots Haruno at a diner and immediately tries to ghost her, but she's built different when it comes to getting under his skin. So naturally, Haruno plops down right next to him and kicks off a conversation where she interrogates him with a whole lineup of questions. After working through that, she fills him in on how Yukino is basically a reluctant softie who keeps a hard wall up between herself and anyone in her family. Following that, she asks what Hachiman's even got going on now that all the school events, which were the only things that ever gave his life any color, are officially done. Hachiman tells her he's got some unfinished business tied to the student council election. Haruno then asks whether Yukino is planning to slide into Meguri's seat as the incoming president, and Hachiman tells her Yukino wants nothing to do with it. Haruno then says it's embarrassingly on the nose that her little sister is out here trying to clone her life, considering she also dodged the presidency back in her day. Their whole exchange gets crashed by Kaori and Chika, two of Hachiman's classmates from middle school. Kaori is visibly shook to catch him out with a woman, so she takes one look at Haruno and declares that Hachiman is absolutely out here reaching several leagues above his level. Haruno asks who she is, and Hachiman passes her off as an old classmate from his junior school days. Not quite sure what label to slap on Haruno, Hachiman introduces her to Kaori as someone who graduated from their school. Haruno, apparently floored that other human beings could actually perceive Hachiman, seized the moment to dig into his backstory and grilled Kaori about his dating history. While Hachiman quietly clenched everything he had, knowing his entire embarrassing archive was about to get cracked wide open, Kaori revealed that he had actually slid into her DMs back in junior school. As Hachiman flashes back to his cringe-era attempts to stop being terminally single, Kaori asks if he's tight with Hayato and could hook her friend Chika up with an introduction. Hachiman shuts that down immediately, saying they're not friends, but Haruno just whips out her phone, calls Hayato directly, and summons him to the diner. After the girls got their Hayato fix, they bounced, while Haruno made sure to inform him that Hachiman apparently has a functioning heart under all that misery. After that, she thanked Hachiman for the company and dipped. Left alone with Hayato, Hachiman gets ready to head out when Hayato drops that Haruno only bothers messing with people she actually has a soft spot for, and Hachiman might just be one of the rare ones she's chosen. The following day, at school, Yui tracks down Hachiman and asks if he's planning to swing by the club. Without sparing her much energy, he tells her he's sitting this one out. Yui, clearly not okay with that answer, lets him know they've cooked up a new plan for the Iroha situation and really don't want him missing from the table. That's enough to flip Hachiman's decision, and he agrees to show up after all. Later in the clubroom, Hachiman settles in and runs through the strategy they've put together. Afterward, he pokes holes all through it, calling it short-sighted, and argues that his own approach would actually handle the problem way more effectively. Yukino then turns around and reminds Hachiman that his methods are fundamentally broken because they never actually deal with the root of anything. She then drops the same question again, asking is he ever going to change? Hachiman answers with a flat no and walks out of the clubroom. Not long after, Iroha chases him down and tells him the volunteer club is literally her only lifeline out of this whole mess. Hachiman tells her to keep it together because they'll work something out. Not long after, Hayato rolls up to Hachiman trying to draft him as backup for a setup date he locked in with Chika over the weekend. The lone wolf shuts it down, claiming he had zero interest, but Hayato begs him to do him a solid, and Hachiman still says no, pointing out that girls were basically uncharted territory for him. Hachiman then bounces out of class, announcing that his weekends were sacred, leaving Hayato looking absolutely cooked in front of the watching girls. Later that same day, a clearly irritated Komachi chucks her phone at Hachiman, demanding he picks up Haruno's incoming call. Hachiman answers, and Haruno immediately questions whether he's beefing with his little sister. She then gets to work, convincing him to tag along on Hayato's date. When Hachiman demands to know why he should even bother, Haruno explains that Hayato's ego was too inflated to grovel, and she was curious why he needed Hachiman there so badly. When she dangles the fact that he'd get to see the girl he once had his eye on, Hachiman fires back, saying whatever went down between them didn't matter since none of it was real. But Haruno calls him out for being stubborn, and ends up twisting his arm by threatening to personally haul him out there herself. Several days later, Hachiman linked up with Hayato, who was already standing around waiting on Kaori and Chika. When the girls finally showed up, the squad collectively agreed to catch a film. Dragging himself along like a drowsy hall monitor, Hachiman suffered through the stroll like it was some kind of boredom obstacle course. As everyone else actually got into the movie, Hachiman gazed at the screen with dead eyes like an off-duty reviewer. Kaori then drops on Hachiman that people would lose their minds if they found out she was sitting in a theater next to him, and that's when it fully clicked just how much of a joke he was to her. Once the film wrapped, the girls showered Hayato with compliments and turned Hachiman into the punchline. Hayato then throws out the idea of hitting the stores before everything shuts down. Inside the shop, while Hayato and the girls browsed some cute fits, Hachiman hovered around like a disinterested mall cop. That boredom evaporated fast when he clocked Yumiko and Ebina doing their shopping just a few feet away. The second Yumiko caught a glimpse of Hayato hanging with those girls, she stumbled over herself trying to storm over to confront them. Already reading the incoming disaster, Hachiman rushed to tip Hayato off, and they dipped to browse somewhere else. While moving through the store, they bumped straight into Tobe and Iroha. Out of nowhere, Tobe unloaded a stream of random talk at Hayato, but cut himself off the moment he clocked the unfamiliar girls and offered a quick apology for barging in. Meanwhile, Iroha had slid over to Hachiman and asked if he was enjoying himself. To Hachiman, though, the question hit less like small talk and more like a direct call-out for messing around with girls instead of doing actual work. As he fumbled through an explanation, Iroha coolly slipped in, asking which one of those girls was his. Right as Hachiman was drowning in the silence, Hayato swooped in to bail him out, clarifying that he was the one who pulled Hachiman into this whole thing. A bit later, with the girls off doing their own thing, Hayato casually asked Hachiman whether Kaori was his kind of girl. Hachiman answered, saying he had a certified track record of shooting his shot at all types of girls. Reading between the lines, Hayato landed on the conclusion that neither of them had actually experienced real love. Hachiman hit him with a lethal side-eye, but before he could clap back, Hayato brought up that old confession about going after someone whose name started with Y, only to immediately wave it off as cap. Shortly after, Hayato checked in with the girls on whether they were hungry, and they confirmed they absolutely were. He then threw it back to them to figure out what they wanted to grab. While they were still thinking it over, Hachiman jumped in and threw out a clearly mid option. The girls immediately clowned him for it, leaving Hachiman questioning whether the disgust was aimed at him or just the suggestion. The roasting kept going even after they finished eating, but Hachiman zoned out the moment he noticed Haruno creeping around in the background. Done watching Hachiman absorb the heat, Hayato finally piped up and told the girls that Hachiman was on a different level since he was linked up with girls who were completely out of their tier. By some wild timing, Yui and Yukino walked in right as Hayato was laying it down, and he smoothly gestured their way to seal the argument. Embarrassed, the girls scrambled out fast, but not without stealing one last glance at Hachiman's so-called baddies. Meanwhile, a visibly irritated Yukino got in Hayato's face for dragging them into this, when the whole reason she showed up was to talk about the student council race. Hachiman blinked at that revelation, since he'd been completely left in the dark this whole time. Yui then filled him in, saying the whole point was to get Hayato to throw his name in for student council president. Haruno then rolled up, acting shocked that Yukino wasn't putting herself forward for the top seat. She then hit Yukino with the accusation that she pulls strings on people exactly the way their mother does. Triggered by those words, Yukino stormed off, and her loyal shadow trailed right behind her. Afterwards, Hachiman demanded to know why Haruno loved terrorizing people, and she responded by saying she was drawn to him because he noticed things that everyone else completely missed. Once Haruno bounced, Hachiman made it clear to Hayato that he wasn't looking for anyone to rescue him, but Hayato clapped back, saying he was just borrowing a move straight from Hachiman's own playbook as payback for throwing his image under the bus back in Kyoto. Unbothered, Hachiman shot back that being on his own was nothing new, and whatever fallout came from his choices was his cross to bear and nobody else's. Later, Hachiman attempts to patch things up with his cranky sister and volunteers to brew her some coffee. He then tells her he needs her take on something, and she tells him to go ahead and let it out. Hachiman proceeds to run her through everything that went down between him and his club crew. Komachi fires back, saying that, unlike everyone else, she's the only one who can stomach his nonsense because that's what siblings do. She then drops on him that his friends are probably hurting because they couldn't decode what he was actually doing. After a gloriously awkward round of sibling counseling, Komachi admits she's genuinely attached to his club members and the club itself, and tells him to pull out every stop to keep that thing alive. Following that, Hachiman sits with Komachi's words and tries to work out the best way to throw a wrench in his friend's plans. The following day at school, Hachiman's brain is still totally offline. Meanwhile, Yui was deep in crafting her campaign speech and pulling inspo from the people around her. Hachiman then wanders into the library and nearly collapses an entire bookshelf in the name of curing his boredom. Drawn in by the disaster zone he's created, Yoshiteru materializes and informs Hachiman that he looks like a living, breathing, sad face emoji. Hachiman claps back, saying that's just his whole thing, and asks what Yoshiteru actually wants. Yoshiteru, clearly worried, starts pressing the brooding mastermind for answers while hyping himself up in the process. Hachiman is about to let it all out, but gets cut off when Komachi crashes in with Saki and Sai in tow as backup to join the mission. Afterward, as the group puts their heads together to figure out how to kneecap the election and rescue the club, the members of Hachiman's cobbled-together war council pepper him with questions about why derailing the elections was even necessary. Komachi then announces she couldn't care less about the election and that protecting the Volunteers Club is her one and only priority. After that exchange, Hachiman found himself stretched thin between what Iroha needed and what Komachi was asking of him. That tension is what made him realize his whole strategy had been off from the jump and would end up blowing back on Iroha. Hachiman chews on it for a bit and lands on the idea that saving the club means getting Iroha to actually take the win. He then grabs a sheet of paper and asks Saki to jot down a roster of people who could realistically run for president. Later that day, Hachiman rang up Yoshiteru and tasked him with launching an anonymous online campaign using the list of names they'd pulled together. Yoshiteru, however, admitted he was sweating about getting caught. Eventually, Hachiman talked his spineless partner in chaos into getting the job done. The next day, Hachiman links up with Iroha and gets her into a conversation while the two of them compile a massive list of nominations. Mid-session, Iroha casually asks whether Hayato is taken. He tells her he honestly doesn't know and turns it around, asking what her deal is with Hayato. Thinking Hachiman was making a move on her, Iroha immediately recoils and makes it clear they could never happen since her heart is already pointed at someone else. Hachiman clarifies that it was a completely harmless question with zero ulterior motives. That's enough to get her talking, and she accidentally lets slip her whole scheme to go after Hayato. When Iroha then demands to know why he's got her doing free labor, Hachiman works on selling her the idea that winning the election would be the ultimate power move against everyone who set her up to fail and keep her from looking like a clown. Iroha says she's into it. Before she could stack on more excuses, Hachiman revealed it was already doable since the enormous list they'd been compiling was full of her nominations, all sourced from the online campaign. While she tried to puzzle out where all those nominations even came from, Hachiman pivoted her attention to all the perks that came with being student council president and let it slip that the role could put her in closer orbit to her crush. The offer was too good to pass up, and Iroha took the bait, hook, line, and sinker. Later that same day, back in the club room, Yukino stated she was stepping up for the presidency because it was simply the most logical move. Yui, on the other hand, declared she was doing it for the club's survival and had zero intention of walking away without the win. But Hachiman told them both to shelve their ambitions and slap down the never-ending list of Iroha's nominations in front of them. Yukino asked point blank if this was his handiwork, but he played dumb and said some anonymous do-gooder was behind it. Hachiman then flashed back to the previous night when he'd single-handedly fabricated Iroha's nomination wave across social media. Yukino noted there was something off about the whole overnight shift in momentum while Yui reached for her phone to go verify the numbers herself, then thought better of it. Yukino decided there was nothing left for her to do and walked out of that room with her disappointment in Hachiman written all over her face. After that, Yui quietly thanked Hachiman for sparing her the nightmare of going head-to-head with Yukino and for actually delivering, even when his methods were cooked. Hachiman clocked then that his cover wasn't nearly as airtight as he'd assumed and tried to act like he had no idea what she was talking about. Yui then told him not to spiral too hard over whatever he had to pull to make it happen, but Hachiman left that room feeling no lighter than before. After all that, Iroha walked away with the win by default, since nobody else was on the ballot. While she spiraled over the mountain of new responsibilities suddenly dumped on her, Hachiman sent her heart rate through the roof by simply telling her to give it her best shot. But the clueless new president, as per usual, clocked Hachiman's genuine encouragement as another attempt to shoot his shot. Later on, while Hachiman was helping Meguri clear out her stuff from the student council room, Meguri let it slip that she'd always pictured Yukino stepping into her role as president, with Yui riding alongside her as vice president, which had Hachiman quietly questioning whether he even registered as a blip on anyone's radar. Meguri kept going, saying she'd envisioned herself dropping by the student council regularly to cheer them on as they racked up wins. And that's when it hit Hachiman just how many people's hopes and dreams he'd quietly bulldozed with his shadowy little schemes. Following everything that went down, the Volunteers Club room had completely lost its vibe. But the club's resident loudmouth attempts to keep the atmosphere alive by rambling about humidifiers and USB, which Yukino and Hachiman couldn't care less about. Later in class, Hayato and his crew chat about their Christmas plans while Hachiman watches them with the energy of someone desperate to be invited. Yui walks up and tells him that if staring were a crime, he'd already be doing consecutive life sentences. Hachiman brushes off the accusation and claps back by asking why she was watching him in the first place. Catching herself slipping, Yui deflects by blaming Hachiman's laser stare for pulling her gaze his way. She follows up by asking if he needs anything, but he insists he's good. Mid-conversation, Sai rolls up and questions whether something's off, pointing out that seeing them chat in class is basically a once-in-a-lifetime event. Yui covers by saying they were just discussing club stuff. That got Sai hyped about the club being back on track, but Yui and Hachiman were not buying it. So they low-key pushed him to swing by the club room whenever he had time to liven up the current dead air situation. Once Sai dips, Yui tells Hachiman to give her a heads up whenever he's heading to the club room. But when school let out, Hachiman slipped out without telling Yui and just stood outside waiting. Yui spots him the second she walks out and demands to know why he bailed on her. Hachiman shrugs it off and says he was literally waiting right there. Once they reached the club room door, Yui switched on her motormouth mode and walked in with her signature loud welcome. But all she got back was Yukino's trademark Sub-Zero grin. Yui kept up her one-woman noise campaign, and in the meantime, Hachiman caught himself fixated on Hayato's squad, looking for clues on how to repair the mess he made. Out of nowhere, Iroha barges into the club in tears, announcing that she is absolutely cooked. She drops the bombshell that the student council got roped into planning a Christmas event alongside Kaihing High. She also mentions she would have gladly rejected the whole thing since she already has Christmas plans, but Miss Shizuka forced her hand on this one. Hachiman assures her that a rocky start is pretty standard and tells her to just hit up Meguri for support. Iroha fires back that the club is literally her last resort because she refuses to disturb Meguri during exam season. Yui then shoots Hachiman a look while they both clock Yukino, who has been completely zoned out this entire time. Yukino finally clocks the silence in the room and out of nowhere asks Yui if they're in. Yui instantly lit up and said yes, pointing out that the club had been doing absolutely nothing for too long. But Hachiman shuts it down and argues that it's not the club's job to babysit leaders who can't figure things out themselves. He then escorts Iroha out of the room while she throws shade at him for pushing her into taking the president role. Outside, during their chat, Hachiman floats the idea of Iroha going to Hayato for backup, but she refuses to dump the heavy workload on her crush, leaving Hachiman to question whether he was built for this kind of suffering. Hachiman ends up agreeing to help, and they lock in a meetup at the community center. Hachiman heads back into the club room and lets the girls know that Iroha is willing to take charge. Yui chimes in saying it would have been fun for the club to take on that task, but the resident Ice Queen declares that having 0 requests and keeping a low profile is the superior outcome. Later on, Hachiman links up with Iroha, who shows up with a late apology and a bag that looks like it weighs a ton. Playing the role of a gentleman, Hachiman moves to take the bag off her hands. But Iroha completely misreads the situation and thinks he's just trying to score points with her. Unbothered by her particular brand of delusion, Hachiman just grabs the bag anyway. They then roll up to the community center, where the rest of the student council had already been sitting around. Not long after, Kaihin's student council president Tamanawa swoops in, does his intro, and immediately pulls Iroha aside. Hachiman then clocks Kaori across the room, who apparently got dragged in as someone's +1. They exchanged a quick greeting before Iroha came back and roasted Hachiman for chatting up a girl. The meeting kicks off shortly after, and the Kaihin High reps immediately drown everyone in a sea of pointless buzzwords. Tamanawa briefly became Hachiman's hero when he said they needed to zero in on what actually counts. But Hachiman was banking on a profound revelation and got served a word salad instead. After what felt like an eternity of verbal ping-pong, the meeting got pushed to another date. After it wrapped, Hachiman noticed that the Subu High reps had been saddled with the bulk of the actual work, while the other side argued about the best lighting for their photos. One look at the faces of Iroha's crew was enough for Hachiman to know they were absolutely not feeling this. The following day, Hachiman runs into Iroha in full shopping mode and carries the bag again as they make their way to the next session with the Kaihin High Student Council. The meeting gets underway, and Tamanawa casually drops a reference to decisions they apparently already made, which sends Hachiman scrambling through the notes, trying to locate them. Completely lost on what they were referencing, he turns to Iroha, but she's just as clueless. Partway through his spiel, Tamanawa pitches going all out on a massive event, but Hachiman shuts it down, pointing out they have neither the time nor the budget for that. Tamanawa brushes him off though, waving it away as something they could sort out later. Then, one of the Kaihin reps throws out the idea of roping in more schools, and everyone immediately hops on board. Refusing to go down without a fight, Hachiman doubles down by firing back with his own flood of technical buzzwords, catching Iroha and everyone else completely off guard. The tactic actually lands, as Tamanawa gives a nod to his input, but the verbal tennis match dragged on until Hachiman had nothing left to throw. Tamanawa then offloads even more tasks onto the Subu reps, and, much to the horror of her teammates, Iroha cheerfully goes along with it. Once the meeting ends, Kaori corners Hachiman and straight up asks if he and his girlfriend have called it quits, bringing up the hangout with Hayato. Hachiman tells her he has been single since the dawn of time, and clarifies that he and Yui and Yukino are just in the same club together. Kaori completely loses it laughing the moment he tells her the club in question is the Volunteer Club. One chill afternoon in the club room, Hachiman discovers a note stuffed in his bag. Cracking it open, it turns out Komachi was trolling him with a personal wish list. Later, when he got back home, he brought what he managed to grab, and they shared an adorable brother-sister moment. The following day at school, Yui walks up to Hachiman and wants to know if he's heading to the club room. Hachiman tells her to go grab her things because he's already on his way out. While Yui ran back to collect her stuff, Hachiman stepped outside to wait up for her. Yui catches up with him and asks if leaving her behind is now a regular thing for him. Hachiman claps back, saying the classroom was a terrible place to just stand around. Walking over to the club room, Hachiman drops the news that he'll be ducking out early for the foreseeable future. Yui fires back saying it's no mystery that he's been running around for Iroha. Hachiman then wants to know if Yukino's in the loop, but Yui says she has no idea. After that, Yui asks if he's going to tackle it solo like he always does, and Hachiman low-key tells her to stay in her lane. As they got closer to the club room, Yui pressed him on whether he thinks Yukino actually wanted to be student council president, but Hachiman had absolutely no answer either. Yui then points out that everything could have gone differently if he hadn't physically stepped in and taken over. Once they're inside the club room, Hachiman asks Yukino if he can bounce early for a bit, using Komachi's upcoming exams as his cover story. Yukino gives him the green light, pointing out that their schedule's been pretty dead for some time anyway. Later on, Hachiman shows up to a student council rep meeting, only to find out Iroha is nowhere to be found. So he tracks down Hayato to see if he's spotted her. Hayato tells him she was hanging around him but had literally just walked off. Hayato then asks whether he's been lending her a hand with the student council stuff. Caught off guard that Hayato's even aware, Hachiman asks why he hasn't been stepping in for Iroha, and Hayato says she never came to him. Hayato also drops that Hachiman is basically a pushover, which is exactly why Iroha can wrap him around her finger. After all that, Hachiman tracks down Iroha, who's out shopping per usual, and says, "Sorry for showing up late." Hachiman attempts to pull a chivalrous move on her, but she shuts it down. Later, Iroha and Hachiman roll up to the conference room, just as Tamawana is giving a speech to the elementary kids. But the guy straight up ditches them without leaving any kind of instructions. Hachiman clocks Rumi in the crowd of younger kids and flashes back to when they crossed paths during the camping trip. Hachiman then throws out the idea that they should get started on the decorations. Hachiman picks up that Iroha doesn't have the nerve to confront Tamawana, so he steps up himself and proposes they draw up a simple list of event goals instead of going in circles with complicated nonsense. But Tamawana's habit of dragging out pointless back and forths wins out, and Hachiman is left completely exasperated. On the way back home, Hachiman bumps into Sai, and they end up at a diner where he starts seeing Sai from a whole new angle. Sai points out that Hachiman looks worn out, but Hachiman waves it off saying it's no big deal. Sai then throws him a compliment, calling him impressive for being a one-man army. But walking home alone, Hachiman starts reflecting on how his choices have been landing on everyone around him and questions whether he actually deserves to be called cool. Later, Hachiman links up with Iroha and she tells him the meeting for today got cancelled. Mid-conversation, the two of them run straight into Kaori. Iroha immediately wants to know how they're connected, and Hachiman gives a vague answer about them having a past. But shockingly, Kaori doesn't blow the whole thing out of proportion like Hachiman expected. At the following meeting, the student council vice president breaks it to Hachiman that the event planning is blowing way past the budget, and Hachiman decides to bring it up during the actual meeting. Then Iroha pops in to update him on the decoration progress, and it hits him that he's somehow been made president without anyone actually voting. Hachiman then walks up to Tamawana and slides him a breakdown of what's realistically doable within their current budget. Tamawana's instinct is to open it up for group discussion, but Hachiman cuts him off, saying they simply don't have the time for that. Tamawana pushes back though, claiming there are still options worth exploring. After that, Hachiman walks over to Rumi and attempts to strike up a conversation, but the kid completely blanks him. Just as he's about to walk away, Rumi calls him out for asking something completely stupid. Hachiman plops down beside her and pitches in with the decorating. A little later, Iroha swipes the box cutter from them and throws out a question asking if Hachiman has a thing for younger girls. Hachiman fires back that he has no problem with younger girls since his own sister is one, then shoos her off. Later that same day, Hachiman crosses paths with Yukino. After a stiff and awkward exchange, Yukino asks whether he's been helping Iroha with the Christmas event, and he replies that he really didn't have much of a choice. Yukino then calls him out, saying there was no need for him to be dishonest. To defend himself, Hachiman insists the whole Komachi exams thing was real and says sorry for going behind their backs on Iroha's situation. Yukino brushes it off and tells him to cut it out with the whole trying to protect them thing. She also gives him an official pass to be absent, telling him to quit dragging himself to the club if he doesn't have to. Following his encounter with Yukino, Hachiman was zoning out at the park when he randomly caught Shizuka eyeing him through her car window. Shizuka then scooped him up, and as they rode, Hachiman clocked that the whip she was pulling wasn't the same one from back in summer. Shizuka cleared it up that the previous one was a rental, but this one was actually hers. Then Shizuka asked if he was cool with a little detour, and Hachiman basically said his schedule was wide open. A little later, Shizuka dropped the news that they'd finally pulled up to where they were headed. Hachiman was out there gazing at the ocean when Shizuka yeeted a drink his way and demanded to know what was going on with him. Hachiman broke down how both Tamanawa and Iroha turned every decision into a group effort just to dodge the blame for any L's, and also owned up to regretting the whole pushing Iroha into president thing. But Shizuka gassed him up for being able to read people, then clapped back, saying he was completely blind to how they actually felt, bringing up Yui and Yukino as her receipts. Caught off guard by their names dropping out of nowhere, Hachiman asks Shizuka what they have to do with any of this. Shizuka then clarified that she was checking in on his dynamic with his clubmates, not interrogating him about the event. She then dropped the hard truth that the real source of all Hachiman's issues was how he tried to logic and math his way through every single situation. And to really hammer it in, Shizuka laid it out that human feelings just don't work like an equation. So naturally, she pinned her entire single girl streak on her own faulty calculations. But Hachiman wasn't buying it, and low-key implied that if he had a few more years on him, he'd be shooting his shot at her. Shizuka, now visibly flustered, returned the favor by loading him up with advice about constantly digging into his own emotions until he pinpoints exactly what it is he's chasing. Then, she dissected his whole situation with the girls, breaking down how he took Iroha's request as a personal mission because of Yukino, and ended up wounding her along the way. Noticing Hachiman's jaw drop, Shizuka quickly walked it back, saying she was just speaking hypothetically. With Hachiman still tuned in, Shizuka told him to actually sit with how his choices could hit the people he gives a damn about. After that, Shizuka proceeded to hit him with a whole extended sermon on the subject of causing people pain. Closing out her speech, Shizuka dropped that Hachiman isn't the only one with growing to do, and said she's confident Yukino will cross paths with someone who can finally break through her walls one day. She then turned to Hachiman and said she was banking on him and Yui to be that someone. Hachiman fired back, saying, "All of that sounds way simpler than it actually is." That pushed Shizuka to tell him to stop living solely in the now and look further ahead. Later that night, Hachiman was fully unable to knock out, so he laid there all night, analyzing every recent call he'd made and brainstorming how to dig himself out of the hole he'd landed in. The next day, Hachiman rolled up to the club room, looking like he'd barely survived a personal encounter with death himself. Yukino was not prepared for Hachiman to plop himself right next to them, leaving both girls wondering if this man had bumped his head somewhere on the way over, since this was so not him. Hachiman then came out and said he had something to ask of them. He then owned up to the fact that going behind their backs to help Iroha plan the Christmas event was a bad move, acknowledged the whole thing was a disaster, and straight up asked for their help. But Yukino, being the absolute hardliner she is, told him that if he really knew it was on him, then he should handle his own mess, which genuinely shook both Hachiman and Yui. Feeling completely wrecked, Hachiman just said, "Never mind," and told them to act like he never brought it up. But Yui wasn't about to let Hachiman absorb all of that, so she turned it around and held herself and Yukino accountable for abandoning him to carry everything on his own. Then she called Yukino out for being unjust and dragged her for keeping her emotions so bottled up. Clocking where this whole convo was spiraling, Hachiman cut in saying that's not even what he showed up to discuss. But Yukino fired back, calling Yui out for being just as guilty, saying she'd been going along with the two of them this whole time. Hachiman then laid it out that, as someone who doubts everything, he's well aware that being vulnerable doesn't automatically mean you'll click with people on a deeper level. But even so, he genuinely wants to get what the people around him are feeling and actually build something real with them. Even after all that vulnerability, Yukino said she had no clue what he was on about and bolted out of the room without warning. After that, Yui talked Hachiman into chasing after Yukino. While heading out, they ran into Iroha, who let Hachiman know today's meeting was cancelled and casually dropped that Yukino had headed up to the roof. When they finally made it to the roof, they spotted Yukino, who wasted no time asking Hachiman exactly what he meant by genuine. Before Hachiman could even get a word out, Yui pulled Yukino into a hug and told her she didn't get it either, but wanted the three of them to work through it and grow together. Yui then admitted she was sick of how messed up things had gotten between all of them, and the tears started rolling. Touched by everything Yui poured out, Yukino finally decided to say yes to Hachiman's request. Later that day, Hachiman couldn't stop replaying his overly honest confession in his head and was absolutely wrecked with secondhand embarrassment from himself. Komachi stumbled upon him drowning in his pit of self-loathing and checked in to see if he was alright. He told her to back off because he was currently in the middle of a full-blown fight with his own brain. In an attempt to snap him out of it, Komachi does her best Hachiman impression and delivers a motivational speech to pull him back from the edge. She also throws in that, yeah, Hachiman is permanently broken beyond repair, but that's exactly the version of him she adores. Her words hit different, and Hachiman pulled himself together, proudly declaring that he accepts himself exactly as he is. The following day, Hachiman walks into the club room, and after a brief stretch of uncomfortable silence, Yukino wants to know what's on the agenda. Hachiman proposes they hold off until Yui arrives so he doesn't have to run through everything twice. Not long after, Yui rolls in grinning like she just got back from a whole weekend hanging out with her favorite person. But Yukino immediately killed her vibe by telling her to back up when Yui planted herself way too close. As they got ready to head to the joint student council meeting for both schools, Yukino and Yui were shook watching Hachiman voluntarily carry all the heavy stuff like a total gentleman. Hachiman briefs Yukino and Yui on how the event planning was going before they all head in with Iroha. After getting a good look at the disaster that was the Christmas event setup, Yukino made her dissatisfaction very clear while Yui pushed for them to sort it out fast. After that, they collectively agree to go get Shizuka's take on things. When they reach her office, Shizuka gives Hachiman props for finishing his task. Completely lost on what she was referencing, he questioned whether they'd even been handed any language homework. They then ran the budget by Shizuka, who clapped back that they were totally missing the spirit of Christmas and pulled out 4 passes to a festive holiday event. She casually drops that she snagged the tickets at some post-wedding party, which had Hachiman quietly questioning whether she'd ever actually tie the knot herself. She then passes the tickets over and sends them off to experience firsthand what a real Christmas event looks like. Once Iroha snatches up the tickets, Hachiman suggests they push the trip back since it was going to be absolutely packed. His fellow socially allergic companion co-signs him and claims she's got no room in her schedule. Yui gave it her best shot, trying to get them to budge from their stubborn positions, but came up completely empty. But the second Shizuka mentioned they'd be scoring a limited Christmas edition of some merch, Hachiman flipped his decision on the spot because Komachi would absolutely love it. Refusing to be the only one sitting it out, Yukino jumped in and revealed she happened to have a spare ticket. Hyped up, Iroha made up her mind to bring someone with her, but kept the identity of that person completely under wraps. Come the day of the event at the train station, Yui rose up with Hayato, Tobe, Yumiko, and Ebina, all of whom were genuinely caught off guard seeing Hachiman actually show up for the trip. They kicked things off by snapping some photos. Yui then dragged her socially averse crew together for one final group shot. Following that, Yukino was visibly annoyed about being pulled into a photo without consent, and Yui chased after her with a stream of apologies. Next, they headed for a space-themed attraction, where Tobe suddenly chickened out and begged to pair up with Hayato instead, terrified of making a fool of himself in front of Iroha. Ibina throws out the idea that he go with Hachiman instead, but Hachiman shut that down immediately. Ibina then prods Hachiman about whether his staged confession stunt is why things between him and Tobe have been off. Sidestepping her question entirely, Hachiman flips it and asks whether her squad was doing alright. Once the ride ended, Hachiman caught Iroha running her classic helpless girl routine to reel Hayato in. But to Iroha's absolute frustration, it was Yumiko who swooped in to help her instead. On the other side, Yukino was starting to look pale because large crowds were completely outside her comfort zone. After that, the group hopped on a panda-themed attraction. Throughout the ride, Yukino was locked in so hard she ordered everyone around her to experience it without making a single sound. Not long after, Hachiman and the crew swung by a gift shop to grab something for Komachi, and Yui playfully nudges Hachiman about what he's after, throwing his clubroom confession right back in his face. Hachiman flatly replies that he doesn't want a thing. Following that, Hachiman's brain decides to replay the moment Yui told him she had no problem going after someone she liked. As they goofed around, Yukino appeared holding a bunch of stuffed dolls and questioned which one Komachi would actually want. Yui instantly jumped in beside her and told Hachiman to snap a photo of the two of them together. A bit later, Hachiman and Yukino split off from the rest while heading to a different ride and told the others they'd link back up. As they lined up for the ride, Hachiman clocked Yukino visibly stiffening up and offered to bail with her, but she pushed through and said she'd manage. Throughout the ride, Yukino was rigid, like someone white-knuckling a steering wheel for the very first time, and Hachiman tried to loosen her up. But she opens up that spots like this took her back to being a kid when Haruno would torment her, which is exactly where that fear came from. Once they were off the ride, Hachiman grabbed her a drink and she tried to reimburse him, but he wouldn't take it. Yukino then goes a step further and gets real about her dynamic with her sister and how she never felt like she belonged anywhere. Hachiman chimes in saying that's something the two of them actually shared. He followed up by asking whether she still had any desire to become like Haruno. Yukino admitted she's completely moved past wanting that. Eventually, they rejoined the group, and Yui immediately said sorry for ditching them. Meanwhile, Yukino and Hachiman got busy looking through the photos Yui had captured at the parade. Not long after, everything went dark, and the fireworks show kicked off. In the middle of all this, Hachiman spotted Hayato and Iroha having a conversation off to the side. Then, out of nowhere, Iroha bolted from the spot in tears. After the fireworks died down, Hayato fills Hachiman in on his talk with Iroha and how he left her completely heartbroken. Hachiman fires back, saying there was zero reason to hurt her if he wasn't even ready to follow through. Hayato claps back, saying it was a calculated move because Iroha is way deeper than she lets on. Then he gives Hachiman props for having the ability to shift the people around him and drops the truth that he's nowhere near as wholesome as everyone assumes. On the walk back, Iroha forces Hachiman to escort her home because Hayato's rejection absolutely wrecked her. Not long after, Iroha goes full rant mode about everything that went down, and Hachiman steps into his unpaid therapist role. Then she admits she went for Hayato because she was low-key inspired by Hachiman's raw confession back in the clubroom. Shook that she caught his most vulnerable moment, Hachiman desperately asks her to erase it from her memory, but she refuses because she's been starving for something real herself. Hachiman then attempts to patch her up with some soft, comforting words, but Iroha calls him out for trying to take advantage of her emotional wreck state and tells him to come back with better material. Out of nowhere, Iroha pops off with a burst of energy, declaring she's not tapping out because her competition will retreat and Hayato might soften up and give her a chance out of pity. Watching her be this down bad, Hachiman tells her she genuinely blows his mind. She then pins the blame on Hachiman for turning her into this person, but Hachiman hits back, saying his only crime was getting her that student council president seat. A bit later, Hachiman sets up a sit-down between the student council and the volunteers club to sort out how not to botch the Christmas event. Hachiman makes it clear they need a session with actual results, and not just a parade of corporate nonsense words. He then turns to the student council reps and puts them on the spot to cough up some ideas. The vice president throws out that they should ride with the original plan because there's no time left to cook up a backup. But Iroha refuses to budge because she absolutely cannot stand the idea of being labeled a failure. At the following meeting, the Shobu High Student Council reps finally snap and collectively go off about all the talk with nothing to show for it. As expected, Tamanawa tries to clap back using his big word collection, but gets absolutely grilled by Hachiman, who basically calls them all noise and no substance. A Kaihin rep tries to get everyone to simmer down, but instantly gets hit with a response from Yukino, who tells them to drop the act and kick rocks. Feeling the tension about to blow the roof off, Yui swoops in with a bubbly suggestion that each school just runs their own thing, giving the audience twice the fun. In the end, they locked in a musical performance and a stage drama from each school. Once the meeting wrapped, Iroha dragged Hachiman and Yukino for going way too savage on the Kaihin Council reps. Later on, Kaori buys Hachiman a drink and gives him credit for cranking up the intensity back at the meeting. But then she friend-zones him on the spot, saying he's nowhere near relationship-worthy, and tosses him an invite to the next hangout. Hachiman fires back that he's collected more than enough emotional damage from women and would rather stay solo. After that, Hachiman swings by the elementary schoolers and spots Rumi grinding solo. He slides in beside her and offers to help, but she shuts him down, saying she's got it covered. Hachiman then throws her own energy right back at her and asks if she'd want to take part in a stage play. When the Christmas event day finally rolls around, everyone's locked in and the whole thing is ready to go. Iroha takes a second to thank Hachiman for everything he did, while nudging him about the remaining loose ends. When it's all said and done, the drama and the overall event absolutely crush it. Back at school some time after, Hachiman receives a paper cup from his club crew and thanks them for coming through on his request and for the present. But Yukino chimes in that she still hasn't delivered on her end of things. As Hachiman racks his brain trying to remember, Yukino tells him it's one big mystery. A week down the line, the whole volunteers club, Komachi included, heads out to ring in the new year. As they strolled around, Yui slipped Hachiman a heads up that Yukino's birthday was right around the corner, and they agreed to go gift hunting the following day. Before long, Yui gets pulled elsewhere, leaving Hachiman stuck with Yukino and Komachi. Eventually, Komachi cooked up an excuse to bail and give them alone time, but Hachiman completely missed the memo and got roasted by Komachi when he offered to tag along. Once Komachi bounced, Yukino couldn't hold back her amusement at all the clowning and took her own shots at Hachiman. Heading home, Hachiman asks Yukino whether she plans to see her family, but she shuts it down and says there's no point. Hachiman gives her a gentle push to go see her folks before hopping off the train at his station. The following day, Hachiman and Yui hit the shops to track down birthday presents for Yukino. As they messed around, Hachiman clocked some sick computer glasses, and out of nowhere, Hayato and Haruno popped up on them. Not long after, the whole group sat down for tea as Haruno and Hayato explained they were out doing a New Year's lunch with their folks. Haruno rings Yukino and extends an invite, but Yukino isn't having it. But Haruno passes the phone over to Hachiman, who somehow actually talks Yukino into showing up. Shortly after Yukino pulls up, her mom stumbles onto the scene and looks completely caught off guard to find her there. And weirdly, just having her mom there is enough to make Yukino visibly uneasy. Later, Hayato and his crew linked up to hash out what academic tracks they were planning to go down. While the majority of his boys locked in on liberal arts, Hayato said he hadn't made up his mind yet and needed more time to think it through. Things went sideways fast when somebody dropped a rumor that Hayato was supposedly cuffed with Yukino, sending the whole classroom into a frenzy. Meanwhile, over in the volunteers club room, Hachiman, Yui, and Iroha were throwing a little birthday bash for Yukino. Since Iroha basically showed up uninvited, Hachiman questions why she even rode into the club room in the first place. Iroha then says she's got a favor to ask, and casually slides in a question about whether Yukino and Hayato are actually together, throwing everyone off except Yukino. Yukino shut the rumors down cold while Yui suggested somebody probably spotted them together and jumped to conclusions. After that, Iroha points out that it was the first time Hayato had ever been tied to one specific person since the man is literally everyone's crush. She then said the rumors boosted Hayato's stock so hard that her competition is already throwing themselves at the school's most wanted. Following that, Iroha swings the question at Hachiman, asking if he's seeing anybody, and he says nope. Hachiman was giving off full abandoned puppy-in-the-rain energy, while Iroha let him know she was low-key proud of him. The girls then clock his sudden shift in mood, and Hachiman uses worrying about Hayato as a decoy excuse. Right after, Yukino slides on her new blue light blocking glasses, and Yui immediately starts showering her with compliments. Yukino locked eyes with Hachiman through the frames, in a silent, unspoken thank you for the gift. Meanwhile, Hachiman didn't exactly look stoked about the glasses, which tipped Yui off that he was the one who copped them for her. Yukino then pulls up the club inbox and spots a message from Yumiko. Almost immediately after, Yumiko walks through the door and tells Yukino they need to have a word. Being the only one with no actual business there, Iroha said her farewells and dipped out. Yukino then turns to Yumiko and asks her what she wants to get into. After that, Yumiko asks straight up whether the rumors hold any truth. Yukino calmly dismissed all of it and said she and Hayato just go way back, which left Yumiko puzzled about why Hayato was so pressed over the whole thing. Yumiko kept firing off questions that started hitting a nerve with Yukino, so she told her that girls like Yumiko are a whole headache. Stung by those words, Yumiko blows up and starts tearing up while Yui jumps in to cool everything down. Hachiman also stepped in to settle Yukino down, but she insisted she was totally fine and unbothered as long as the people who matter to her get it. After all that, Yumiko opens up about being scared of losing her closeness with Hayato, since he hasn't clued in anyone, including her, on what he's planning to do. Yui then steps in with some comfort, letting her know that feeling that way makes complete sense. Hachiman then puts it to Yumiko whether she'd still want to dig into Hayato's business even if he ended up resenting her for it. Desperate for any kind of answer, Yumiko says yes without hesitation. Hachiman then promises her he'll get to the bottom of it. Later, Hachiman heads down to the football pitch to pull up on Hayato, who was already out there running drills. While he was waiting, Yukino and Yui swung by with a drink for him and he thanked them before sending them off. After the match wrapped up, Hachiman cuts straight to it and asks Hayato about his future direction, but Hayato tells him to quit trying to corner him and to get lost. Sometime after that, the student council needed an extra pair of hands, so Hachiman showed up and Iroha immediately grabbed him, claiming he was behind schedule. But she yanked her hands back the second she clocked Yui and Yukino standing right behind him. Iroha then broke down what needed to get done, and also mentioned they had some alumni coming through. In perfect timing, Haruno strolls in and greets everyone in the room. Yukino then takes a shot at asking her sister about Hayato's future direction and gets hit with a flat-out no. After that, Haruno asks Hachiman to walk her back, and he goes along with it even though he clearly wasn't feeling it. She then tries to fish out what track Yukino picked, but Hachiman plays dumb and says he has no idea. She tells him to look into it and report back to her. Later down the line, at the winter event marathon, Hachiman hops into the race and catches up to Hayato, trying to nudge him toward picking the sciences. But Hayato shut that down and said he couldn't stand him and had always felt like he was living in his shadow. With that said, Hayato jumped back into the race, while Hachiman scrambled to stay on his heels and threw out a sorry for throwing him off. Hayato then tells him there's no way he's losing to him, and blasts off while Hachiman completely crumbles to the ground. Afterward, Hayato crossed the finish line first and took the mic for his winner's speech, giving a nod to Yumiko and quietly putting the circulating rumors to bed. Meanwhile, Hachiman hobbles around on a busted knee and drags himself to the nurse's office, where he randomly finds Yukino already in there resting. She steps up and offers to sort out his scrapes for him. While she was at it, she asked whether he managed to pull anything useful out of his conversation with Hayato. He told her the only thing he knows now is that Hayato isn't heading toward the sciences. Yukino suddenly glances up, and the two of them get hit with a thick wave of romantic tension. Hachiman then decides it's time to head back to class and gets up. When he swings the door open, he walks straight into Yui, who quickly threw out that she had literally just arrived. Later at the after party, Hayato walks up to Yukino and apologizes about the whole rumor situation, while she thanks him for having her back through it all. Yui suddenly appears and whisks Yukino off somewhere. Right after, Hayato tells Hachiman that he kept his choice under wraps because the people around him would have tried to sway whatever he decided. A little while after, Haruno buys Hachiman a drink and questions whether he's figured out what Yukino decided. Hachiman replied, that yeah, Yukino filled him in, but he had zero plans to spill it to Haruno. Haruno then goes on to say she's relieved her anxious little sister had finally found a person worth trusting. Back at school, with Valentine's Day buzz already in the air, To brought up how badly he wanted something sweet, even though he knows it wrecks him. Hayato tells him to relax, because Valentine's Day is literally right there. Listening to the boys go back and forth rattles Yumiko, who clearly has something in the works, but Yui steps in to reassure her, saying she's not just anyone, and Hayato could easily make a special case for her. Even as she hyped up her girl, Yui glanced over at Hachiman and caught him slipping out of the classroom. Heading toward the clubroom, Hachiman drifts into a memory of Yui handing him handmade chocolates, only to get snapped back to reality by Yui herself. Yui immediately calls him out for bailing on her again. He pushes back though, saying he never planned to walk out with her, and that he'd hung around in class just to check on how things were playing out between Hayato and Yumiko. After that exchange, Yui tells him things are good between them, and that she treasures every second they get. Hachiman then drops that the past is packed with L's, and the future is anyone's guess, so he figures the present might be the only stretch of time that actually feels good. As they got closer to the clubroom, Hachiman casually asked when she'd have time to hang out with him, and her face immediately went full tomato. Yui plays it cool by fake-checking her calendar, and admits she's pretty much wide open but wants a moment to think it over. They eventually made it to the clubroom, where Yukino and Iroha were already waiting and immediately hit them with a "you're late." Hachiman wasted no time asking what Iroha needed now, and she laid out her whole plan to bake something for Hayato. Yui then stomped all over that plan and told her straight up that Hayato doesn't accept Valentine's sweets from anyone. Iroha was shook and asked for an explanation, and Yukino brought up elementary school, saying he does it to keep the drama to a minimum. Iroha then pivots and decides she'll make her chocolates for Hachiman instead, double-checking with Yui first that he's actually into sweets. She then announces she wants his honest feedback on whatever chocolate she ends up creating. Iroha then wonders out loud whether Hachiman ever actually receives anything on Valentine's, but Yui quickly jumps in saying he definitely will, then throws in a question to make it seem more casual. Hachiman then mentions he'll probably get some from his little sister, which immediately leads Iroha to ask if he's got a sister complex. Hachiman shuts that down and calls her an idiot, but Iroha clearly isn't finished roasting him. She then pivots to accusing him of having a thing for younger girls, which pushed Hachiman to pull out her own birthday and remind her she's not exactly a kid herself. Everyone in the room was low-key stunned that Hachiman had her birthday memorized, but he immediately clarified that she just randomly brought it up herself one time. Not long after, Ebina and Yumiko roll into the clubroom, and Yumiko admits she wants to attempt making chocolates at least one time before graduating. Ebina then pitched the wild idea of Hachiman kicking off a bromance with Hayato by handing him chocolates on Valentine's Day. Hachiman is not having it and shuts her down immediately. Mid-conversation, Hachiman noticed Saki lurking by the clubroom door, and a little while later she'd grabbed a seat and jumped into the chocolate talk herself. Yumiko then straight up asked whether Saki was planning on giving her chocolates to someone. The question visibly annoyed Saki, and she fired back at Yumiko, saying she wasn't some lovesick airhead like her. Saki then clarifies to the group that it's actually her little sister who wants to give chocolate making a shot, the catch being that her highest kitchen accomplishment to date was successfully boiling water. Trying to take the edge off, Yui admits that she herself is equally terrible in the kitchen. Watching all the girls get themselves hyped up, Hachiman proposed engineering a scenario where Hayato would basically have no choice but to take the sweets. So they put together a scheme to set up a candy-making workshop where Hayato would be roped into sampling everything. Iroha immediately jumps into planning mode, while Yui wonders what her job would even be if Yukino ended up being the instructor. In the end, Hachiman got voluntold to be the official taste tester and hand out feedback. When the day finally arrived, Subuhai teamed up with the Kaihing High Student Council, who covered the costs for the whole baking session. Iroha hit everyone with another curveball by sneaking Haruno in as the guest instructor, which absolutely sent Yukino over the edge. Following that, Yukino walks Yumiko through the chocolate-making process. While the Kaihin High crew chatted among themselves, Kaori walked over to Hachiman to grab a chocolate mold and asked whether she'd ever actually given him chocolates for Valentine's. Hachiman passed it over and confirmed that no, she'd never given him a single thing. Kaori then vows she'll definitely get him one, which immediately cranked up the tension in the room. Just to stir the pot further, Haruno casually reveals that Yukino once gave Hayato chocolates herself, which sent another shockwave through the whole room. After everything wrapped up, Yukino and Yui brought out their chocolates for Hachiman, who tried them and expressed his gratitude. Then Haruno swoops in and immediately kills the mood. Later that evening, as the three of them headed home, they ran into Yukino's mother, and just like that, Yui and Hachiman finally got why Yukino ended up the way she did. A bit later, back in the club room, Yukino steps up and apologizes on her mother's behalf. Her friends quickly swooped in to ease her guilt by pointing out that every mom stresses over their kids' well-being. Hachiman then chips in that Komachi and his mom have been going at each other's necks over her incoming entrance exams. Yui then asks whether Hachiman is stressing about his little sister actually making it through the exams. Hachiman fires back, saying he's way more stressed about Komachi being around guys and his own bad rep dragging hers down. While all this was going down, Yukino cracked open a box of cookies and slid some over to Yui, who thanked her and immediately asked if Hachiman was getting any. Yukino reached over, grabbed a few cookies, and handed them his way. On the walk home, Yukino dug into her bag and was about to hand Hachiman a pack of her homemade cookies, but held back the moment she remembered Yui was right there. Yui, however, caught on immediately and tried to quietly slip away, but Yukino wasn't having it, so all three of them just stood there in painfully awkward silence. Then, Haruno appeared out of nowhere and casually announced she'd shown up to escort Yukino home, but Yukino clapped back, saying she's not a toddler and is perfectly capable of handling herself. Haruno took that as an open invitation and went in on Yukino, saying she had zero independence, despite her family pouring everything into helping her stand on her own 2 feet. Haruno then tosses out the big question of what exactly Yukino plans to do with her future. Hachiman cuts Haruno off and suggests they move their little family drama somewhere with a bit more privacy. Haruno waves it off though, and acts like they were just making small talk. After Haruno bounced, Yui extended an invite for them to come hang at her place. At Yui's house, her mom came out and introduced herself to Yui's friends, gushing that she'd heard so much about Hachiman already. Yui, though, was lightning fast in steering her mom out of the room before any more got spilled. Watching how naturally Yui vibed with her mom hit Yukino differently, and she quietly announced she was heading out. But Yui and Hachiman double-teamed her and talked her into staying the night. So, she pulled out her phone and called home to let them know she wouldn't be back. Later that night, Yui asks Yukino whether she's got any clarity on what she actually wants. And while Yukino sits with the question, Yui throws out the idea of going on a group date. The next morning, Hachiman got a ring from Yui, asking him to come out on a date with her. Both Yukino and Hachiman nearly lost it running into each other at the meetup spot, but Yui played it cool and asked them both to stick around, saying she wanted the three of them to spend real time together. After that, they rode out to Kasai Rinkai Park, where they spent the whole day heating up the aquariums, roasting each other, and geeking out over all kinds of different fish. After making the rounds, the trio picked up on some penguins absolutely losing it and went to investigate. Hachiman whipped out his phone to snap some pics he could flex on Komachi later. But then Yukino started reading a poster loaded with penguin trivia that dropped the fact that penguins lock in with one mate and ride it out until one of them is gone. The fun fact hit way too close to home and stirred something emotional between them, so Yukino quietly excused herself from the exhibit, leaving Hachiman and Yui standing there. Shortly after, Hachiman trailed after Yukino, and she finally opened up about how hard it's always been for her to find where she fits in. Yui then caught up to them and apologized for making them wait. Yui goes on to say how genuinely happy she is to be experiencing all of this alongside her people. Yukino and Hachiman were clearly running on empty at that point, but Yui still had a full tank left and threw out the idea of hitting the roller coaster. After they survived the ride and soaked in the view of the whole city below, Yui asked where things were headed from here. Hachiman deadpanned that they obviously had to go home, but Yui was very clearly talking about the messy love triangle sitting between all three of them. Yui then slipped a bag of her homemade cookies into Hachiman's hands as a little thank you. After that, Yui laid it out that actually being honest about their feelings for each other could blow up the whole dynamic they had going, so she put in a request for everything to just stay exactly the way it already was. She then turned to Yukino and asked where she stood on that. When Yukino visibly couldn't pull together a response, Hachiman stepped in and said he couldn't get behind Yui's idea, arguing that it was better to sit in the discomfort of not knowing than to build something hollow between them, and the girls both came around to his take. Yukino then decided to take on the challenge of actually addressing Hachiman's request for all of them to genuinely understand one another. Hachiman then proposes they relocate somewhere more private to chat, but not before grabbing them all some drinks. Once he's back with the beverages, they dive into a completely pointless discussion about Yui's cookies. She admits to Hachiman that she can't guarantee the cookies aren't a straight-up, no-holds-barred, tasteless catastrophe, but insists she put everything she had into baking them. Hachiman tips his hat to her commitment to earning that waifu certification, which makes her so ecstatic that she points out he's literally the reason she pushed through and finished them. Apparently, both girls were fully spiraling over how tragic their cookies looked and tasted right up until Hachiman came through. Initially, he got them heated by straight up telling them that not even a starving dog would touch the monstrosity they had baked. But then he flipped it and said that if a dude understood the sheer effort behind those cookies, he wouldn't care if they looked worse than your ex's baking or tasted like pure disappointment. That one line reignites the girls' confidence and slaps grins right onto their faces, convincing them their cookies might just be history's second greatest snack. Cutting back to the present, the snow finally lets up, and the trio agrees it's time to head back. While they're making their way out of the park, Yukino randomly drops into a story about the day of her birth and the whole backstory behind her name. This admission leads Hachiman to start poking around about Yukino's background, pointing out that she's never once let them in on anything remotely personal. Initially, Yukino stalls, but once Yui reaches out and grabs her hand for support, she finally lets it all out. She explains that way back when she was just a kid, the one and only dream she ever had was to take over her father's position. But since she came with a built-in older sister, she always understood that the role would never be hers to claim. To top it all off, her mother, who runs their household like she's auditioning for the role of Cinderella's wicked stepmother, officially declared that the sister would inherit their father's legacy. In Yukino's own words, the whole reason she turned out as a privileged, self-absorbed princess is that her mother genuinely couldn't care less about the direction her life took. She gave her free rein to do anything at any time, with zero guidance. So naturally, Yukino never picked up the manual on how to behave like a decent human. Yukino also comes clean about wanting to prove to her family that she's way more than just another mean girl. She then calls on Hachiman and Yui to back her up on this road to self-sufficiency, and they promise to be her personal sidekicks. The very first move she commits to is packing up her apartment and heading back to the family house to start patching things up with her parents. Yui isn't thrilled about it, but Yukino is dead set that it's the right call, so Yui caves and agrees to tag along to the apartment. When they get there, they stumble into Haruno, who's approximately 2 drinks away from legally qualifying as a walking distillery. Haruno greets her sister with her usual bubbly energy, and Yukino wastes no time letting her know there's some serious business they need to talk through. The next morning, Hachiman shuffles downstairs to grab his coffee and catches Komachi in full panic mode, throwing her stuff together to make it to her interview. He casually throws out a question about how her written tests went, and she lets him know they were fine. She says she's not losing sleep over the results and is keeping her eyes on the interview, so he floats the idea of grabbing food after, and she jumps at it. He fumbles by calling it a date, and Komachi immediately tells him to take his sister complex somewhere far away from her, then bounces to her interview. With time to kill before his meetup with Komachi, Hachiman wanders around town with no real destination. When he clocks the discount Elsa herself, aka Saki, chilling in a cafe with her little sister Keika, he rolls up and takes a seat. After getting Keika a treat, he brings up Saki's little brother and how the kid is handling his entrance exams, and Saki says she has no clue because the boy is deep in his edgy phase, convinced he's out emoing. Hachiman tells her the kid will snap out of it eventually, but Saki isn't buying it, since she's already run through her entire playbook trying to get through to him with zero success. She also drops that her brother is dead set on going to a public school rather than the private one she was rooting for. Not long after Hachiman told her to just let the kid breathe, Komachi came bursting in and enthusiastically high-fived the whole table. Hachiman was genuinely stoked to see her, but the second he voiced it, she clapped back and shut him down before he could even finish the sentence. Eventually, Saki and Keika dip and Komachi decides she'd rather blow money at the mall than sit down for a meal. After burning through the rest of the afternoon shopping, the two head home and Komachi gets to work on dinner. Hachiman volunteers to tidy up the place, but she firmly tells him to keep his hands off, making it clear she's handling everything on her own. She says it's the bare minimum she can do to repay him for every solo cleaning session he pulled while she was buried in exam prep. Later, the two ease into a warm, relaxed conversation, and Komachi takes the moment to genuinely thank him for all the ways he has shown up for her. The out-of-nowhere sincerity hits Hachiman right in the feelings and gets him tearing up, and just as he tries to play it cool and wave it off, Komachi slips away to go handle other stuff. The following morning, Hachiman was grabbing something from the vending machine when Hayato rolled up on him. Hayato asks Hachiman to pass along a congrats to Komachi about her entrance exams, and then slyly steers the conversation toward his dynamic with Yukino. That question yanks Hachiman's brain back to everything that went down 2 nights prior after they bumped into Haruno outside Yukino's building. Once they all headed upstairs to the apartment, Haruno cracked open yet another bottle of champagne, which prompted Yukino to ask if she was on a mission to become the next legendary drunk. Haruno assures her little sister that her mind is still sharper than a kitten's claw and tells her to get to the point. Yukino calmly lays out her plan to move back into the family home and sort out the mess with their parents. Haruno catches Yukino completely off guard by agreeing to help deal with their uptight parents, but warns her not to hold her breath, waiting for them to change. She then lets it slip that their mother had actually dispatched her to keep tabs on Yukino, claiming the woman had supposedly been worried sick about her. Yukino says she couldn't care less about the motive behind the supervision, since she'd already clocked their mother would be sticking her nose in anyway. With that settled, Haruno tells Yukino to start packing her things and ring their mother to break the news about the move. Once Yukino confirms she'll follow through, Haruno announces she'll be crashing at the apartment for the foreseeable future. Yui then steps in and volunteers to help Yukino pack up her belongings, but Yukino tries to wave her off. That holds until Hachiman speaks up and calls her out for pretending she doesn't need anyone's help. Haruno watches the 3 of them for a beat longer, before announcing she's making a run to the convenience store. Shockingly, when Hachiman steps off the elevator later, he finds Haruno planted there waiting for him. After he calls her out for the ambush, he heads out of the building alongside her, because it's pretty clear she's got something on her mind to talk about. As they walk, Haruno admits that she's relieved she made it back in time and actually got to sit down and talk with her sister. Hachiman confesses that her willingness to back Yukino's plan genuinely caught him off guard, and she tells him it's simply what she owes Yukino as an older sister, even if things don't pan out the way Yukino is picturing. Hachiman asks why she didn't just pump the brakes on Yukino's plan, and she says it's because Yukino wouldn't have budged anyway, since that girl low-key had main character syndrome and was fully convinced she was protected by the greatest plot armor in existence. She also mentioned it was the first time Yukino had actually spoken her mind out loud, and she refused to make her feel like she had nobody to lean on. Impressed, Hachiman admits he never pegged Haruno as someone who could actually pull off the big sister role, and Haruno claps back, saying she always wanted an older brother just like him. That line makes him go red in the face, and when she starts pressing up against him like she's a cat demanding attention, he tells her she's absolutely hammered, but she flat out denies it. She claims alcohol has 0 effect on her, and insists she's always fully switched on no matter how many bottles she's thrown back. Naturally, Hachiman isn't buying a word of it and chalks the whole thing up to drunk talk, but Haruno doubles down and swears she's being straight with him. She even draws a parallel between them, saying that in a lot of ways, he was basically her mirror image when it came to staying sharp and aware. Hachiman tries to push back, but she leans in and whispers something in his ear that completely kills his argument. Snapping back to the present, Hachiman chucks his can into the trash and starts walking off, completely tuning out whatever Hayato is rambling about. This is because Haruno's parting words are stuck looping in his head like Drake's latest banger on repeat. It turns out she had told him that she was dead, certain he was the type who couldn't get drunk no matter how hard he tried. Later, after the final bell, Hachiman and Yui cross paths in the hallway. Yui roasts Hachiman for yelping when she walked into him and asks whether he's heading to the club room. He confirms he is, and as the 2 of them set off walking together, he asks what's up with the blanket she's lugging around. She tells him she wants to stash the blanket in the club room so she can pull it out whenever she's hanging around there. However, she admits she's scared the club might not have much time left and says she just wants it to stick around long enough for her to actually use the blanket during club sessions. When they finally arrive at the club room, the door is locked, so Hachiman treks over to the teacher's office to grab the key. There, Shizuka greets him and tells him Yukino already came by and took the key, so he heads right back to the club room. When he gets there, he finds Yui and Yukino already inside, and Yui immediately calls him a full-on idiot for not waiting and just letting her text Yukino to check if she'd already snagged the key. After graciously accepting his new title as Certified Idiot of the Century, Yukino offers him some coffee, and he asks if the whole moving situation is wrapped up. She confirms it is, and gives full credit to Yui, who showed up and helped her clear out the entire apartment. They're still on the topic when Iroha, the student council president, waltzes into the room lugging a projector. They watch her set the whole thing up and hook it to a laptop, which she casually explains she borrowed purely to screen a movie. The trio doesn't even bother questioning why she showed up to their little clubhouse to run a private screening and just quietly settles in to watch alongside her. The film was a foreign high school movie that wrapped up with a prom scene right before the end credits rolled. Once it was over, Iroha announced that she wanted to throw a prom for them, so that when her own graduation crept up, the school would have zero excuse not to greenlight another one. Her whole motivation was that she wanted the prom queen crown, and she wanted every single person watching when she got it. At first, the three musketeers shoot her ideas straight down, but Iroha works her magic and talks them around, so Yukino agrees to get on board and help. Iroha flips out with excitement, throws her arms around Yukino, and starts going overboard with the gratitude, but the cold empress immediately peels the clingy girl off of her. She then tells her crew that she wants to use this whole thing as her launching pad to demonstrate her independence and prove her worth to her parents. Yui volunteers to pitch in and drags Hachiman along with them, which sends Iroha completely over the moon. That night, back at home, Yui stood staring at the photo of herself with Yukino and Hachiman, and found herself replaying everything from the night she went over to help Yukino pack. When Yukino slipped away to take a phone call, Yui moved over to clear off the bed and stumbled across a photo Yukino had tucked out of sight behind one of her plushies. It was a snapshot she'd taken with Hachiman at an amusement park, and it left Yui quietly wondering whether she was just the odd one out in whatever was going on between the two of them. A quiet pang of sadness crept over her too, because deep down she had always wished the connection she had with Hachiman could feel the same as the one he shared with Yukino. Meanwhile, Shizuku is sitting by herself in the staff room, gazing at the service club key and replaying her exchange with Hachiman in her head. After letting him know that Yukino had taken the key, she questioned why he hadn't just phoned Yukino before showing up. Hachiman confessed he didn't even have the badly written tsundere's contact info, and when she pointed out that Yui might, he realized he was a complete idiot. As he moved to head out, he clocked that the rest of the teachers were grinding away and asked Shizuka why she was out here cosplaying as Sakura instead of doing her job. She insisted she was swamped, but the cigarette dangling from her finger said something completely different, so she dropped the act. Instead, she admitted she was on a quick break and begged him to keep it between them and not snitch. Totally unbothered by whatever she had going on, Hachiman said his goodbyes to Shizuka, but right as he was about to dip, she opened her mouth. Out of nowhere, she changed her mind about spilling whatever she wanted to say and chucked a canned coffee at him instead. Back in the now, Shizuka eyes the box parked at the base of her desk and questions whether she made the wrong call hiding her upcoming exit from Hachiman. A couple days down the line, Hachiman is slumped in class, yawning like a starving beast when Saika rolls up to him. The guy asks why Hachiman looks so wrecked when the school day hasn't even kicked off yet, and Hachiman comes clean about pulling late nights on video games. Saika roasts him for ignoring his own well-being and hits him with a full speech on why getting enough sleep actually matters. The moment Saika wrapped up his lecture, Hachiman asked if he had any time to chill together. Saika goes to respond, but as he runs through everything on his plate, he comes to the sad realization that he's completely booked solid for a while. Hachiman says he's cool with waiting it out and tells Saika to hit him up whenever his calendar actually clears up. Right at that moment, Hachiman gets a text from Komachi, but before he can even check it, Saki bolts out of the classroom like her life depends on it. Everyone in class is left thoroughly confused, but Hachiman pieces it together instantly and sprints after her. Once he's outside, he spots Komachi, who's sobbing as she breaks the news that she got into the school. That was clearly the whole reason behind her text, and as she clutches his jacket, bawling her eyes out, they catch Taishi, Saki's little brother, chatting with her in the background. Same as Komachi, he too got his acceptance, and once he passes Saki his admission documents, she holds them up and stares at them with pride. The moment Taishi spots Hachiman and Komachi, he makes his way over and fills Hachiman in on his own acceptance. Hachiman is low-key rude to the kid, even after the boy clarifies that he's Saki's younger brother. Right as he warns the boy that one more bro will earn him a busted jaw, Yui shows up and Komachi immediately sprints over to share the exciting update. Hachiman is caught off guard by just how worked up Komachi is as she gushes to Yui, and when the girls step away to ring Yukino with the news, he quietly texts his mom to share the update on Komachi's behalf. A bit later, out on the school steps, Iroha hits Hachiman up to help her and Yukino with putting together the prom. He pushes back on it at first, but eventually gives in and agrees to lend a hand. Hachiman cautions Iroha against running Yukino into the ground, voicing worry over her low physical endurance and her habit of getting completely absorbed in tasks. Iroha fires back with a grin, asking why he's always riding so hard for Yukino, and clowns him for putting them in the cis zone. She tells him to cut it out because not every girl wants to be handled like a sister by the dude they're actually feeling. The next day, when he shows up at the student council room for prom planning, both Yui and Yukino are visibly shocked to see him walk in. He plays it cool like it's no big deal, but he quickly clocks that Iroha is doing absolutely nothing, lounging near the kettle while Yukino and Yui go ham on the whiteboard. Hachiman is stunned to find out the three of them have already been hyping the prom online, until he hears it's all been happening on Lin, an app he doesn't even touch. Hachiman confesses he's still fuzzy on what a prom even is, which leads Yukino to loop him into making a promo video for the whole thing. Later on, all four of them get ready to suit up in formal fits for the promo video, which is being shot inside the school gym. Iroha realizes she completely forgot to mention that Hachiman would be performing in the video as a dancer, and she throws out an apology for dropping the ball. While Hachiman is gearing up to throw on his tuxedo, Iroha doubles down on her apology for all the chaos she caused. Once he's all dressed up, Hachiman peers into the mirror and decides the tuxedo makes him look like a burnt-out pianist who's one bad day away from checking out permanently. That's when Yukino steps in, rocking a sharp tailcoat with her hair tied up in a ponytail, fully committing to the male dance partner role for the shoot. Hachiman, for once, tosses Yukino a genuine compliment on how she looks, and she responds by straightening his pocket square and fixing up his cufflinks. He then steps out of the dressing room to see how Yui is doing, where Saki is helping her get into her dress. Yui demands the dress be cinched as tight as possible around her waist, but she lets out a yelp the second Saki actually pulls it. Before heading out, Saki gives Hachiman a heads up to keep an eye on Yui while she's moving around, given the heels and the length of the dress. Yui starts doing her makeup, visibly flustered by Hachiman watching her the whole time. She announces that she's going all out on her appearance, even knowing the final cut won't show any faces because she wants to look good for the raw footage they're keeping. Once she's set, Hachiman awkwardly extends his arm to help steady her as the two of them head down the stairs outside the changing room. The noise in the gym drops to a hush the moment Yukino walks in, leaving the entire room shook by how stunning she looks. Iroha, who's paired with her for the dance, immediately starts messing with Yukino and links arms with her, sending Yukino into a fluster. Together, they put on a seriously sleek performance for the first round of filming, with Yukino's talent straight up carrying the whole thing. But Yukino and Iroha both decide the footage came out way too clean and tap Hachiman and Yui to take center stage for the next round of shooting. Yui is shaking with nerves about dancing, so Hachiman cracks a joke asking whether she's afraid her two left feet are about to embarrass her. That seems to ease her up a bit, and she tells him she's got it, even if her moves are nowhere close to Bridgerton level. Hachiman attempts to walk her through some steps, but Kakeru cuts in and starts hyping him up for the whole dance thing. Iroha wastes no time telling Kakeru to zip it and get into position because they're about to roll camera. Once the dancing kicked off, Hachiman and Yui flow to the music, but Hachiman was low-key embarrassed because he was dripping with sweat, which had Yui cracking up. The second the track switches to something with a faster beat, Hachiman dips off the floor and posts up to watch everyone else go crazy. After taking it all in, Hachiman decides that the party scene just isn't built for him, even if he gets why people are into it. A few days on, while Hachiman and the girls go through the photos from the promo shoot, they chat about how all the hype the event has been pulling in is seriously massive. When Hachiman floats some fresh ideas for the prom, Yukino shuts him down cold and tells him his half-cooked suggestions aren't worth a single second of their time. She clocks that the prom is hers and Iroha's baby, and makes it clear that neither he nor Yui are needed in the equation. She doubles down on her need to prove she can stand on her own 2 feet by pulling this prom off with minimal outside input, so he lets it go. Later, once he and Yui step out of the clubroom, he throws out the idea of going to grab a celebratory present for Komachi. Yui is totally on board with it, so the two of them make their way over to the nearby mall to hunt down the perfect thing for her. The moment they get there, though, Hachiman locks eyes with a coffee-themed vending machine, and this caffeine-obsessed man starts losing his mind over it, like a Gojo stan who just walked into an anime expo. His little femboy moment cracks Yui up, but she stays quiet and just watches him go as he snaps selfies with the machine. After he's got a few shots in, she catches him off guard by jumping in for one with him. Once the impromptu photo shoot wrapped up, they wandered into a furniture store and started poking around. One thing leads to another, and they end up in a studio apartment showroom where Yui talks Hachiman into sitting down on the bed with her. Once he does, she asks what kind of career he fantasized about as a little kid, and he rattles off a few options, all of them very comfortably in the high salary bracket. Yui obviously clocks this right away, but doesn't harp on it, pivoting to share that her own childhood dreams were somewhere between becoming a florist, running a cake shop, or debuting as an idol. She also quietly drops that what she really wanted more than anything was to be a bride, and there's a slight waver in her voice when she says it. Lucky for her, Hachiman doesn't touch that one, so she steers them away from it by pitching the idea of hand-making a gift for Komachi instead of just buying something. The day after, as Hachiman and Yui are wrapping up and heading home after school, Iroha intercepts them and leads them straight to the school's reception room. When they get there, they walk in on Yukino, Haruno, and their mother going absolutely at it in a heated standoff, while Shizuka sits off to the side watching it all unfold in silence. As it turns out, Yukino's mother has zero interest in the prom going ahead and lays out all her concerns about the kinds of wild behavior the students might get up to on the night. Iroha snaps back at the woman and demands to know why she and the other supposedly opposed parents didn't open their mouths and say something way sooner. Brushing the question off entirely, the stone-cold woman turns to Haruno and asks whether any of the school's previous graduation parties ever caused any real issues, and Haruno tells her no. Watching the woman keep her composure while absolutely tearing his friends apart has Hachiman low-key fascinated, and he quietly reminds himself that first impressions can be wildly misleading. He then turns to Shizuka and asks why the school even greenlit the prom idea when they're clearly running on old-fashioned energy. Shizuka breaks it down for him. The school likes to brand itself as one that actually listens to its students and keeps its nose out of the events they choose to put together on their own. At that point, Yukino's mother tells Yukino to head home at a decent hour and not run herself into the ground chasing after prom perfection. After she bounces, Haruno accidentally lets it slip about Shizuka's upcoming exit from the school, and it hits everyone in that room like a freight train. Later on, Yukino gets to work trying to brainstorm ways to persuade the parent committee that prom night isn't just a cover for students to get blazed and hook up. Hachiman does his usual thing and tries to toss in his 2 cents, but she waves him off and insists she's got the whole situation handled on her own. Haruno catches the whole exchange and wastes no time roasting him for instantly slipping into Big Brother mode every time he's around the girls. Just as she's about to dig deeper into the whole messy dynamic he's got going on with Yukino and Yui, Yukino shuts her down. She turns back to Hachiman and tells him flat out that she doesn't want his help, even as he pushes back and tries to make his case. The next morning, with rain coming down outside, Hachiman finds himself drifting back to the conversation he had with Haruno right after that meeting wrapped up. During that talk, she had asked him how he'd actually define what he has going on with Yukino and Yui. He compared it to the messy love triangles you see on Love Island, which got a laugh out of Haruno. But she hit back by saying, the real word for what they've got is codependency. And she pointed out that Hachiman genuinely gets a boost from Yukino leaning on him. She then told him straight up that if Yukino is ever going to grow into her own person and stop relying on everyone else, he needs to quit swooping in to cushion every fall. Snapping back to the present, as Hachiman and Yui walk home together, Yui brings up the idea of baking a homemade cake for Komachi. Right then, a message comes through from Iroha, who is absolutely spiraling over the prom being on the verge of getting axed. Hachiman immediately rings Shizuka to ask her to step in, but she reminds him that Yukino made it explicitly clear she didn't want him poking around in the prom planning. After dodging and giving nothing but vague non-answers for a bit, Hachiman eventually drops the act and admits that he needs to help Yukino with the prom because he made her a promise once that he'd be there to rescue her. That's all Shizuka needs to hear, and she tells Hachiman to get himself back to the school. After he ends the call, he notices a single tear sliding down Yui's face and catches her eyes starting to gloss over, and it immediately puts him on edge. Even though Hachiman offers to walk her all the way home, Yui waves off his concern and tells him those were tears of relief and that she's completely fine. The second Hachiman takes off, sprinting back toward the school. Yui slips behind a metal fence and slides down to the ground, fully breaking down. She tries to talk herself into believing it's a good thing that she managed to stop crying, telling herself that Hachiman would have dropped everything and stayed if she'd let him see her fall apart. She spirals into despair over the fact that there's nothing she can do to stand between Hachiman and Yukino's connection, and her mind drifts to the photo Yukino keeps of the two of them at the amusement park. As the sobs keep coming, she admits to herself that even with all the logical reasoning she keeps trying to throw at her feelings, part of her genuinely wishes she'd let Hachiman see those tears so he would have stayed for her. Meanwhile, Hachiman had already made it to school and was chilling with Shizuka in the faculty room. She fills him in on what's going down, letting him know the school admins are thinking about scrapping the prom. Based on what she's dug up, both the board and the PTA don't want to come off as the villains, so they're banking on getting the prom planning committee to pull the plug on the event themselves. This gets Hachiman clocking that the school is trying to pin the blame on the committee and leave them to deal with the students' rage on their own. He notes that with that many powerful parents opposing the prom, it totally tracks that they'd want the students to just throw in the towel. Shizuka lets him know she's got nothing she can do since her position gives her absolutely no pull. Hachiman fires back that he's not trying to stay at the bottom of the food chain, and she tells him to fight his way up to the top so he can call the shots. That line gets his brain pulling up memories of Yukino's mom, and suddenly a plan starts taking shape in his head. Shizuka hits him with a reminder that Yukino doesn't want his involvement, but he tells her he couldn't care less and would do literally anything to pull her out of the situation. Shizuka shoots back that she doesn't think overriding Yukino's wishes is the move, since the girl treats the prom as a rite of passage toward her goals. Hachiman argues that his plan won't undermine Yukino's hard work in any way, but Shizuka tells him that how he goes about it will be what determines Yukino's reaction. Then, out of nowhere, he flashes back to Yukino's teary-eyed plea for him to stay out of it, and he admits he's way too young to be dealing with this level of female drama. Shizuka tells him to man up and get moving, pointing him toward Yukino, who's still hanging out in the student council room. Before he heads out, he asks Shizuka whether going against the school admins would get her in hot water, and she tells him she doesn't give a single care who she takes off. She says the worst-case scenario is getting fired, and if it came to that, she'd just track down some wealthy stud and lock him down in marriage. The only catch was that her Riz game was basically just as dead as her non-existent backside. As she goes into full meltdown mode about being single, Hachiman quietly prays that someone equally delusional stumbles along and puts a ring on it. As he turns to leave, she apologizes for hiding her transfer from him, and he tells her not to sweat it. When Hachiman rolls up to the student council room, he finds Iroha posted outside the door, and she grills him on what he's doing there. He tells her he's there to help, and she immediately plants herself in his way, throwing it back in his face that Yukino doesn't want him involved. Hachiman swears up and down that he's got a plan, guaranteed to fix their mess, but Iroha's not buying it, so she physically hauls him off. Sitting together in the deserted hallway, Iroha tells Hachiman he needs to think twice about what he's doing. She explains that Yukino is done being the helpless girl who needs saving, which is precisely why she canceled her Disney deal. Hachiman pushes back though, swearing that he's not out here trying to sabotage what Yukino is working toward. All he's trying to do is bring a solution to the table that works out for everyone in the mix. That gets Iroha calling out that his overprotective tendencies are gonna land him in trouble someday, but she admits his plan could actually pull through. She says she's putting her trust in him to sort this out, but warns she'll fillet him like a fish if things go sideways and Yukino ends up caving to the school admins. When they head back to the student council room, they catch Yukino zoning out at the board, though she spins around the moment she hears them walk in. She's caught off guard seeing Hachiman there, but holds herself together long enough to flip the board around and fix him some tea. She asks whether he's been clued in on the school admin's scheme, and he confirms he has, saying he was with Yui when the call came in. He then throws out whether there's anything he can do, and she shuts that down immediately, insisting she's got the whole thing handled. Iroha, though, gives him the signal to not fall for her straight-up lie, so he pushes further and asks what solutions she's managed to put together. She says the committee is tossing around a couple of ideas, but Hachiman tells her that from everything he's picked up, canceling the prom like the school wants is basically their only real option. Yukino admits she's hunting for a way to get the adults on board with letting the prom happen, and Hachiman asks what her strongest option is right now. Yukino gives him some wishy-washy non-answer, which tells him everything he needs to know. This stubborn girl is dead set on doing things the difficult way. He pushes back his chair and heads to the board to see what's been written up, and as he reads through the ideas, Iroha breaks down how every single one of them has a gap in it. He agrees with her assessment, but goes ahead and asks if he can jump in and help, which catches Yukino off guard, since she hadn't thought he'd so boldly brush aside what she wanted. He tells her he gets that they're in a seriously complicated spot, but promises that if they combine their brainpower, they can figure out a way to rescue the prom. Iroha doesn't say a word through all of this, but Yukino steps up and confesses that she's tired of leaning on him like she has every other time before. Hachiman tries to sell her on the idea that taking his help doesn't make her look weak, but she flat out shuts him down anyway. Left with no other move, he decides to play dirty and hits her with the ultimate Uno reverse, telling her he's doing all of this because he wants to protect her, throwing back the promise he made her. Too bad for him, though. Yukino has got a reinforced iron fortress guarding her heart, so his words don't crack her and she shoots down his offer to help yet again. With no other way to flip her stance, this unhinged dude challenges her to a face-off just like the ones they've had before. He says it's the only logical move since they're clearly not seeing eye to eye, and Iroha backs him up saying, a friendly challenge never did anybody any harm. Those few agonizing seconds Yukino takes to mull it over nearly send Hachiman into cardiac arrest, but when she finally opens her mouth and accepts, he's genuinely shook. She does make sure to remind him, though, that the deal means whoever loses has to obey whatever the winner says, and he's fine with that. The grin spreading across his face freaks Iroha out so hard she asks if his name is Mo Lester, because only a certified weirdo smiles like that at the idea of having someone under their command. Hachiman is completely blindsided by that, and even more so when Yukino chimes in saying his smile outcreeps even Erin's stepmom. He tries to plead his case, but both girls just crack up at him, and Yukino keeps poking fun at him before pivoting to flex about how she's never once lost a game. Iroha is low-key obsessed with how cute their back and forth is, and deep down wishes she had that kind of connection with someone. Eventually, they wrap up the playful roasting, and Yukino lays out the terms of their showdown one more time. She makes it clear she has no intention of losing because that's simply not in her nature, and Hachiman tells her to come at him. Once he's gone, Yukino gets back to grinding on her prom proposal, but Iroha is losing it on the inside. She mentally calls them both a massive headache, but can't deny that the two of them genuinely click. Shortly after, Iroha catches up to Hachiman on the street and tells him he's the biggest idiot she's ever had the misfortune of encountering. She lays into him for making everything messier by throwing down a challenge to Yukino when he full well knew that girl despised losing more than Lex hates Superman. Hachiman tries to make a case for himself, but she furiously storms ahead, completely blanking him even as he trails behind her like an abandoned dog. She acts like he doesn't exist until they hit a vending machine, and she not so subtly hints that he better buy her something to drink. After he grabs drinks for the both of them, they find a spot to sit, and Iroha owns up to her part in making everything messier by pushing so hard for a prom. Hachiman waves off the blame and apologizes for pulling her into the tangled mess that is his whole situation with Yukino. Out of nowhere, Iroha tells him she genuinely doesn't mind, and that sparks enough curiosity in Hachiman for him to ask why she actually wanted a prom in the first place. Iroha comes clean that it's her way of sending Shizuka off properly, and that's when it clicks for him that she'd been in the loop about Shizuka's transfer all along. It also genuinely catches him off guard that Iroha has that kind of soft spot for Shizuka, since she was not exactly the type to let people get close, completely oblivious to whatever nonsense is swirling around in Hachiman's head. Iroha tells him they're actually pretty alike, because she knows he's the kind of guy who'd eat himself alive with regret if he didn't do something for the people he cares about. Hachiman doesn't push back or argue against that, so Iroha keeps going. She tells him that no matter how she carries herself, she still wants her upperclassmen, the ones she considers her people, to go out of high school in the most legendary way possible. That gives him the opening to clown on her, saying she's a total softie underneath it all, despite acting like she's living through a never-ending existential breakdown every single day. Iroha claps back and tells him not to mix up what she's doing with genuine kindness, because honestly, she's doing all of it for her own sanity and absolutely nothing else. She throws in that she's essentially throwing one last send-off for her friends through this prom, and he tells her to quit playing the wholesome girl card. Out of nowhere, she snatches him up by the collar and dares him to run that back, but his legendary cowardice kicks in, and he physically cannot do it, so she releases him and dips. That night, while the Hikigaya siblings were in the middle of a casual sibling chat, Hachiman asks Komachi what people actually do when graduation rolls around, and Komachi fires back, asking if binge-watching One Piece has finally fried every last brain cell he had. She tells him his question is genuinely baffling, but mentions she's planning a trip with her crew, which immediately activates his overprotective Big Brother protocol. But before he can even get the words out, Komachi hits him with a look so lethal it shuts him up faster than a smack to the face ever could. She goes on to say her class is supposed to throw a graduation party, but she's planning to skip it and just grab dinner with her friends instead. Hachiman diligently types everything she says into his phone, because believe it or not, this hopeless excuse of a main character genuinely has no clue what to do with his friends on graduation day. He asks whether she's got anything else lined up, telling her that what she's described so far sounds like optional side content. She takes pity on the dunce and fills him in on the school farewell ceremony, which he vaguely remembers taking part in back when he graduated from elementary and middle school. Komachi then flips it and asks what his school has planned for graduation, so he pulls up a social media post on his phone hyping up the prom, and Komachi says, "It sounds like a solid idea," even though she has absolutely no clue what a prom is. Hachiman stays quiet, since he's low-key stressing about the whole thing possibly getting cancelled. The next day at school, Hachiman checks in on Yui to see where her head is at, and she tells him she's totally fine while wearing the most forced smile known to man. As they head to class, the topic drifts to his face-off with Yukino, and Yui pushes him to just sit down and talk it out with her instead, but he shuts that down, explaining that a challenge is literally the only leverage he has to get Yukino to let him in. That's enough to make Yui reconsider her whole stance, and she decides she's going to throw her support behind whatever he's cooking up for the prom. Later that day, they link up at a restaurant to go over Hachiman's game plan, and after a quick rundown, he decides to rope in Yoshiteru, Saika, and Saki. Because at this point, they need every single body they can get. After that, Hachiman and Yui bounce over to an internet cafe to dig into research for the fake prom, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, Yui fakes falling asleep on Hachiman's shoulder, secretly hoping deep down that the moment could stretch on forever. The following day, Yoshiteru drags Hachiman and Yui over to the gaming club, and after getting introductions out of the way, hits them up for help pulling off the fake prom. The moment he lets slip that there's zero pay involved, because he's so financially cooked he's on the verge of shattering the Guinness World Record for most broke character alive, the guys immediately try to back out. However, Yui steps in and begs the guys not to take his not-so-smooth attempt at voluntolding them into free labor personally. Sadly, that still wasn't enough to seal the deal, so Hachiman hits them with a speech straight out of Captain Irwin's playbook, which shockingly does the trick. As the conversation keeps going, Hanado questions how exactly they plan to pull off a prom when none of them have ever done one before. Hachiman convinces them they can totally make it work, and even throws out the idea that they hop on the planning committee next year to level up their own prom. The second Iroha's name drops, the guys visibly stiffen up, because they fully bought into the rumor that she was literally spawned by the devil. Yui wastes no time nudging Hachiman to say something, so he steps up and lets the guys know that everything they've heard about Iroha is straight up cap. The guys aren't buying a single word of it, seeing as they've both personally caught strays from Iroha, and she's repeatedly made them feel like absolute garbage on more than one occasion. Still, Hachiman somehow pulls it off and gets them to believe that underneath it all, Iroha is actually just a massive softie. They keep the brainstorm going, and Hachiman throws out the idea of doing a joint prom with a different school, which immediately has everyone questioning if he's gone completely off the rails. He insists it's actually a solid idea, so Yui throws out the suggestion of teaming up with Sabu High School. Hachiman isn't feeling it since they've got history with them, but Yui argues it's at least worth trying if they actually go talk to them. With that sorted, they move on to talking about building a social media page to hype up the prom, and Yui suggests Hachiman go tap Hayato, the big boss of the student committee, to give them a hand. Next day, Hachiman wishes Komachi a happy birthday before heading to the library to link up with Yui, Kaori, and Tamanawa. The second Kaori spots him, she calls him out for going ghost on her, and Hachiman feeds her some story about switching phones and losing contacts, even though he'd wiped her number from his phone ages ago. The unsuspecting girl swallows his excuse whole and offers to resend him her line info, but he shuts that down by claiming he doesn't even have the app. Kaori cracks up at this and straight up tells him he's going to need a way more convincing excuse if he actually wants to shake her off. They finally kick off the meeting, and once Tamanawa reads through the proposal Hachiman and Yui brought in, he starts listing out everything it's missing. This ticks off both Hachiman and Yui, so Hachiman fires back saying his critiques are garbage, and, out of nowhere, breaks into a rap to drive his point home. Yui's jaw drops at this, but she's even more stunned when Tamanawa claps back with his own rap, and just like that, a legendary rap battle kicks off, one that Tamanawa ends up taking the W in. He then tells Hachiman and Yui to go back and redo the whole proposal, this time actually spelling out what they're trying to achieve if they want it to get approved. Yui nods along and agrees, but Hachiman stays dead silent, glaring at Tamanawa like he's one wrong move away from catching hands. Later, over in the gaming club room, Hachiman's crew gets to work building out the logo and social media page for the joint prom. Once they land on a decent name for the joint prom, Hachiman dips to go find Hayato, but spots Yukino on the way and decides to stop and chop it up with her for a minute. They fall into their usual back and forth and catch each other up on how their separate proms are coming along. Yui rolls up shortly after and lets Yukino know she's been helping Hachiman out. While Yukino and Yui chat it up, Hachiman hangs back, watching quietly and sitting with his thoughts about everything going on. When Hachiman finally tracks down Hayato, he asks him to jump in and help with the fake prom, but Hayato shuts it down immediately, saying he wants no part in anything that puts him against Yukino. He'd always had his sights set on being the one to come through for Yukino, but Hachiman kept swooping in before he ever got the chance. Now that they were squaring off to prove she actually needed saving, Hayato figured the cleanest move was for Hachiman to just step aside. Obviously, Hachiman isn't doing that, so Hayato presses him on what he's actually trying to accomplish, and Hachiman fires back that he's trying to show that what they have isn't just two people leaning on each other to function. A few days later, Hachiman, Yui, Yoshiteru, Hina, and Yumiko roll out to the beach to knock out some promo shots. Not long into the shoot though, Hachiman quickly figures out his camera game is nowhere near Spider-Man levels, so Hina steps in and walks him through the basics. Once she's confident he's got it down, she heads over to strip off all the extra layers Yumiko had piled on, leaving the girl whining about the cold, not that Hina loses any sleep over it. When she swings around to do the same to Yui, she catches her, already having voluntarily ditched the extra clothing herself. When Hachiman starts snapping photos again, he tries to rope Hina into being in front of the camera, but she shuts him down and says her whole frumpy disguise situation would kill the vibe of the entire shoot. The conversation soon drifts toward Hachiman's whole approach to helping Yukino, and she asks if there's not a simpler path to take. Hachiman comes back with the idea that the most direct route is often the toughest one, and that he'd rather do it his way. Right then, Yui and Yumiko holler at Hina to come join them, so she ditches Hachiman and sprints over to her girls. Hachiman snaps one last shot, and when it actually comes out clean, they lock it in as the cover photo for their announcement. Hanato and Sagami take charge of all the design stuff for the social media page, and when they pull it up for Yui and Hachiman, both of them give it the thumbs up. They also drop photos of Kaori and Tamanawa to officially hype up the joint prom. Hachiman gives the boys their flowers for putting in the work, and says that if things go the way they should, they'll start seeing traction at the top of next week. He runs Yoshiteru and the rest of the crew through what they need to be doing in the meantime, then wraps up the session. As he and Yui head out together, he rings up Haruno and asks her to meet them at a cafe. Once they're there, he asks for her help pushing the prom, and she comes back, wondering why he's going this hard. It's because she still clocks their dynamic with Yukino as codependent, but Hachiman flips it and calls it mutual support. Haruno drops the reminder that they still need to get their mother on board to greenlight the prom, but she does toss them a hint on how to crack that. After they bounce from the cafe, Yui turns to Hachiman and asks what Haruno even meant by throwing around the word codependent. The next day at school, Hachiman gets called in to sit before Yukino's mother, who breaks it to him and Shizuka that a chunk of the organization is still pushing back on the prom happening. Hachiman chews on what she said, then connects the dots that she's a heavy hitter on the board and straight up asks her to lean on the opposition and bring them around. Low-key impressed by how bold he is, the woman asks for his name. He gives it, and she immediately clocks that he's the same guy from that car crash and apologizes on the spot. She also agrees to put in the effort to get the other parents to sign off on the prom. Meanwhile, over at a cafe, Haruno and Hayato are deep in a chat about Hachiman and Yukino's whole codependency thing. Hayato pushes back on Haruno's take that they're codependent, but Haruno holds her ground and brings up receipts from how things used to be. Out of nowhere, though, she mentions that the day before, Yui had actually circled back to her and told her she was reading Hachiman and Yukino's relationship all wrong. Later, Hachiman rolls into the service club room and drops the news on Yukino that her prom got the green light. This kicks off a whole back and forth over who actually came out on top in their little showdown, and after going several rounds, Yukino gets emotional. She tells Hachiman that being in the service club was genuinely fun for her and that she wants to close the chapter on their fake relationship. When all is said and done, Hachiman takes the L, asking Yukino to name her wish, and she says she wants whatever Yui wished for to actually come true. Hachiman says, "Bet," and once he steps out of the room, Yukino fires off a message to Yui, asking her to come meet her, and they end up linking near a bus stop. They talk through the prom and how she just couldn't bring herself to turn down Hachiman's help, and as Yui watches Yukino smile, it hits her like a truck that the three of them are never going back to what they were. A couple days later, Komachi catches Hachiman zoning out on the couch in the living room and asks what's got his brain locked in. He tells her he'll fill her in when the moment is right, then adds that, given the way things are looking, he doesn't think the celebration they had in mind is actually going to happen. Komachi says she's totally cool with scrapping the celebration and lets slip that she's been cooking up a surprise for him. He immediately clocks that it's not really a surprise anymore since she just blurted it out. Komachi doubles down and insists it's still very much a surprise, and says she's actually relieved the celebration is going to be a family-only thing. Later at school, while Kakeru's going on and on to Yui and the crew about his holiday plans, Hachiman slides into Yui's texts, asking her to come find him. Yui thinks the text is kinda weird, but she peels away from the group to go hear him out and immediately roasts him for not just walking up to her like a regular human being. As they're heading home after school, Yui gives him his props for winning Yukino's mother over and mentions that it was actually Yukino herself who hit her up with the news that the prom got approved. The second Hachiman hears that Yukino's been reaching out to her, he suggests they swing by a nearby park to talk it through. At the park, Hachiman grabs Yui a drink and asks what she wants from him, acting like some kind of wish-granting genie with 3 slots to fill. Yui's thrown off by the question, so he breaks it down and says he just wants to know if there's anything he can do for her. Yui fires back that there's a whole laundry list of things she wants from him, but she only runs through a handful of the most relevant ones, most of which are about how terribly he treats her. Genuinely embarrassed by how trash his behavior has been, Hachiman apologizes, and Yui just laughs it off. She keeps going through all the things she needs him to fix when it comes to how he acts around her, but when she finally pauses, she drops that the battle between him and Yukino isn't actually finished yet. Hachiman says he already threw in the towel, but Yui tells him he had absolutely no business doing that. He assures her he's at peace with how things played out, and asks which wish she actually wants him to make good on. Yui sits with it for a sec, and then admits that because she's a straight-up greedy person, she just can't narrow it down to one single thing. Hachiman tells her that as long as it's something he can actually pull off, he'll take care of all of them, which immediately earns him a scolding from Yui. She tells him he always goes around putting everyone else's needs on his back, even when they're borderline impossible to deal with. Yui says she wants to keep being in Yukino's corner for the prom prep because she needs to see how the whole thing plays out. She also throws out that she wants to throw Komachi a proper birthday bash and hang out with him somewhere that isn't just school. Her last wish is to actually make one of his wishes come true, and Hachiman admits he has absolutely no idea what he even wants. Yui tells him to actually use his brain for once and come up with something, since she genuinely wants to be the one to grant it, and she promises she'll do the same and come up with a wish for him to fulfill. The next morning at school, Hachiman bumps into Yumiko at the lockers, and she wastes no time asking what exactly he's on with Yui. She makes it clear she couldn't care less what he does with his sad little life, but she puts him on notice that if he so much as thinks about hurting Yui, she'll make sure he regrets ever existing. Right on cue, a bubbly Yui shows up, so Yumiko pockets the threats and lets Hachiman and Yui head to class unbothered. They run into Yukino and Iroha in the hallway, and Yukino gives them a quick rundown on where prom prep stands and the logistical mess they're dealing with, but still stonewalls Hachiman's offer to help, even as Iroha basically low-key signals that they're short on people. As everyone goes their separate ways, Iroha leans in and quietly tells him he can jump in whenever he wants. After Yukino and Iroha bounce, Yui asks Hachiman to come through to her place on Saturday. At Yui's apartment, she and Hachiman settle on baking cookies for Komachi's party, but Yui's mom swoops in, pushing for fruit tarts instead, so they head out to grab everything they need. Back at the apartment, Hachiman and Yui run quality control on the tarts. Yui's mom then brings up a secret ingredient and puts Hachiman on the spot to guess what it was, and whatever he said made Yui's face go full tomato. Later, once the fruit tarts are all done, Hachiman decides to head out, so Yui walks him to the door, and he hands her an early White Day gift before leaving. Back at school, the graduation ceremony kicks off, with Iroha stepping up to deliver her farewell speech to the seniors, followed by Meguri taking the mic. As Meguri gets through her speech, Hachiman is low-key fighting back tears, which has Kakeru fully convinced he's suffering from hay fever. Kakeru falls in line behind Saika and passes him some tissues to help him out. Meguri wraps up her speech and sends it home by bringing back her cultural festival address, which has the whole student body losing it. After the ceremony, Hachiman and Yui make their way to the student council room to say their own personal goodbyes to Meguri. Once Meguri heads out, Yui and Iroha clock Hachiman sniffling and start poking at him about whether he's got a thing for Meguri. Hachiman shoots back that some people just don't deserve her, but Iroha stays pressed and dumps a small task on him anyway. Some days pass, and while prom prep is still in full swing, Hachiman gets hit with a wave of nostalgia after Yukino passes him the headphones they'll be using to stay connected throughout the event. But Yukino's giving off zero-interest vibes, and the moment he reaches over to fix the mic height for her, she shuts him down saying she's got it, so he backs off and admits it's just second nature for him. That little comment kicks off a painfully awkward back and forth about how he's always jumping in to help people, even when nobody asked. He eventually heads over to the control booth to drop off Iroha's headphones, and after she drags him through some light teasing, she flips the switch into full work mode. Not long after, she breaks the silence and throws Hachiman an offer to join the student council. But he just tells her he'll think about it. The topic quickly pivots to the service club, and Hachiman says there's nothing worth doing about it, since the club is on its way out anyway. Even so, Iroha pushes him to go talk to Yukino about keeping the club alive and even throws in an offer to back him up on it. Before he even gets a word in, Iroha spins back around to her post, leaving him just enough room to zone out staring at her and sort his head out. Out of nowhere, Iroha whips around and straight up tells him that if he doesn't stop eyeing her like that, he's going to catch feelings. She even throws in a little pose for good measure, and just as he opens his mouth to clap back, Yukino's voice cuts through the headphones and kills the moment. She calls everyone to their spots because the prom is seconds from kicking off, and they all snap into place without question. The whole event runs smooth as butter, and eventually Hachiman steps away from the control room to catch some air. While he's drifting through the gym with nowhere to be, Yui flags him down to come hang by her, so he makes his way over. They give each other a quick pat on the back for pulling it off, and once the slow dance kicks in, Yui slides in and asks if he's landed on a wish yet. He admits he's got nothing, then flips it back on her, because she made the same promise to come up with something. Yui's also drawing a blank, so he decides to cash in on her other wish, the one about hanging out outside of school, and floats the idea of going somewhere together, once exams wrap up. The second exams come up, Yui's energy tanks hard, but she bounces back fast, declaring that the promise of spending time with him is exactly the fuel she needs to crush her exams. Hachiman then pokes around asking if she wants him to knock out one more tiny wish, and she hits him with a request to dance with her. She's clearly mortified asking that and tries to bury her face, but Hachiman catches her completely off guard by just saying yes. Once they're done dancing, Hachiman heads back to the control room to cover for Iroha so she can finally get a breather. Right after Iroha steps out, Yukino's voice crackles through the headphones, and he gives her the green light to get up on stage and wrap things up with a speech. Yukino freezes up at the thought of walking out there, so he throws her a couple of encouraging lines, and she responds by telling him she'll be waiting on him to come through on her wish. Once the prom wraps up, the whole crew assembles in the conference room, where Yukino's mom pulls her aside to praise her for how well the event went, and Yukino drops the bombshell that she plans to step into her father's role down the line. Shockingly, her mother gives her full backing on it, though she does tack on a word of caution to make sure Yukino really thinks it through before locking herself in. Right after mom dips, the rest of the crowd clears out too, leaving just Hachiman, Yukino, Haruno, and Yui behind, and Yukino takes a moment to thank Haruno for having her back. Haruno does not take that well at all, firing back that she flat out refuses to believe that whatever Yukino pulled off today is anywhere near the level of 20 years worth of her own grind. She thinks it's absolutely ridiculous for Yukino to assume she'd just roll over and hand everything over, and straight up tells her little sister she's going to have to put in way more work to earn that. When she's done going off, she spins around to bounce, but as she passes by Hachiman, she flashes this smug little smirk that leaves the poor clueless guy with absolutely no idea what she's actually up to. The second the door closes behind Haruno, Yukino turns to her friends and immediately starts apologizing for the way her sister just acted. The moment she starts making excuses for Haruno, Yui shuts that down and tells her not to discount all the blood, sweat, and tears she poured into pulling this prom off and showing her mom what she's capable of. Once the feelings get too heavy to hold back, Yui starts going on about how genuinely amazing it's been hanging out with them in the service club, and despite Hachiman not being on board with it, all three of them end up agreeing to shut the club down. But just as he's about to say something about that decision, Iroha comes barging in to let them know the gym cleanup is done, so he uses the opportunity to just slip out. Yukino rushes out right behind him, and once she catches him, she hits him with a thank you for everything he did and a sorry for all the headaches she's put him through. Hachiman waves it off, insisting that if anybody was the problem, it was him, and tells her to save the apologies. She's clearly fighting back a wave of emotions at this point, but she keeps it together and swears she'll push harder and be better going forward. Once she's said everything she needed to, Hachiman moves to walk away, but she's still gripping onto his jacket, leaving him no option but to gently pry her hand off himself. After walking away from Yukino, Hachiman spots Haruno creeping around in the hallway and calls her out on the stuff she said earlier. Haruno shoots back that Yukino's whole wish situation is basically just her trying to make up for something, and lays out exactly how she reads the dynamic between the three of them. Hachiman concedes that he already knows where they stand, so Haruno hits him with one last reminder not to lose himself in it all, and walks off. A bit later, Shizuka rolls up to find Hachiman still rooted to the same spot outside the conference room where Haruno ditched him and offers him a ride home, but somehow they both wind up at a massive game center instead. After Shizuka gets her swings in at the batting cage, Hachiman brings up how Haruno thinks their whole dynamic with the girls is straight up codependent. Shizuka admits she gets where Haruno's head is at, and throws in that plenty of other people would probably come to the same conclusion. But she makes it clear they're all dead wrong, and that what the three of them have goes way beyond that. Taking that in, Hachiman's mind drifts back to that moment when the three of them made the call to dissolve the club, and he concludes that she's absolutely right. Shizuka scribbles something on a paper napkin as she goes on about how their bond could be labeled a million different ways, but when she flips it around to show him, the single word staring back at him is love. After Shizuka drops a few more nuggets of wisdom on him, Hachiman makes up his mind to patch things up with the girls in whatever way feels right to him. The week after, Hachiman runs smack into Yui in the school hallway, and the two of them drift over to a park to hash things out. She tells him it feels off not having club sessions to look forward to anymore, and confesses she's struggling to wrap her head around the fact that their club is really and truly done. Hachiman tries to sell her on the idea that she'll adjust soon enough, but she's not buying it and turns around to ask if he's genuinely at peace with the way things played out. Hachiman admits he can't get behind Yukino's reasoning for pulling the plug on the club because deep down he feels like she did it out of guilt. But at the same time, he can't shake the nagging sense that the whole thing is somehow his fault. Out of nowhere, he straight up smacks himself in the face, which sends Yui into full panic mode. But the second he admits he's not ready to stop being in Yukino's life, she settles down and tries to lift his spirits by pointing out he'll still have plenty of chances to cross paths with her. Hachiman sulks that he has no clue how to fix what's broken between them, so Yui basically tells him to zip it. She calls him out on the fact that his one and only issue is that he's trash at communication, and tells him that if he just stops being a coward and actually talks to Yukino, everything will slide back into place. When he tries to fight back, she shuts him down immediately and announces that she's made her decision. Her wish is to keep Yukino in her life because the only spot she ever wants to be is wherever both of them are. After soaking all of that in, Hachiman swears he'll make it happen. So Yui asks what his actual game plan is for pulling Yukino back, and he straight up admits he has no idea. Still, he makes it clear he's going all in regardless, and Yui fires back that all it really takes is a single word. He guesses out loud that the word is sorry, and without even waiting for her reply, he launches into a full apology for every ounce of grief he's put her through. He also lets out some genuinely emotional stuff that has Yui's eyes threatening to betray her, but she holds the line and roasts him for being embarrassingly sappy. Eventually, she stands up, announces she's ready to bounce, so he walks her all the way back. After he pieces out, Yui steps inside and is immediately greeted by her dog, who plops his head right into her lap. In that quiet little moment, a few tears hit her palm, and her mom, who had been hovering behind her the whole time, told her to pull an Elsa and just let it go. Yui is caught completely off guard by her mother popping up like that, but the woman wastes zero time pivoting the conversation as she wraps her in a hug. She tells her that what she's carrying inside runs way deeper than she even realizes, and as Yui completely breaks down, it hits her that this is genuinely the very first time she's ever experienced something called love. The next day, Judge Judy, actually no, it's Iroha, sits Yoshiteru, Sagami, and Hatano down for a full-on interrogation about the supposed joint prom they've been out here hyping up. The boys try to play dumb and act like they knew absolutely nothing, but Iroha went way too hard in the bad cop role, and within minutes flat, they were spilling every single detail. They told her they'd been roped into staging a fake prom and pointed her straight at Hachiman for the full story. Iroha is beyond irritated when she hears this, especially since Hachiman is currently tied up in a meeting with Yukino's mother. Not even trying to hide how much she can't stand that woman, Iroha goes off calling her every name under the sun and openly wonders why Hachiman even bothered cooking up a fake prom scheme. The boys let her know they tried their hardest to talk him out of his unhinged plan, but the guy absolutely would not listen. They ran her through the full list of wild things he had them doing, which only made Iroha question whether Hachiman had completely lost his mind. Back in the staff room, Hachiman is going all out, trying to get Yukino's mother on board with pitching the idea of a joint prom to the board. But the woman is not budging 1 inch. He keeps pushing anyway, and tells her straight up that he left the fake prom feeling completely unsatisfied, which throws her off, so she asks him to explain himself. Grabbing the opening with both hands, Hachiman tells her it's because he's convinced the whole thing could have been executed on a completely different level, and the only real way to bring that vision to life was through an actual prom. That comment cracks Haruno up, and she clocks him as an idiot, but he makes it very clear he couldn't care less what she thinks. She tries to make him fold by throwing the powerful family name in his face and questioning whether he really wanted to trash all the sweat Yukino poured into the first prom. Hachiman fires back that he's fully prepared to own whatever fallout comes his way, which intrigues Yukino's mother so much she straight up asks him if he actually believes he can pull off a second prom. Before he even gets the chance to respond, Yukino cuts in and says a second prom is a pipe dream because their budget is basically bone dry. Hachiman tells her to stop stressing about the money because he already knows exactly the right person to stretch what they've got left, and when he pitches the idea of her jumping in to co-plan the whole thing, Yukino looks genuinely caught off guard. Brushing her reaction aside, he pivots to her mother and asks whether she believes her own daughter is capable of pulling his plan off. Impressed by the sheer nerve of that question, Yukino's mother says the call is entirely Yukino's to make about whether she wants in on the joint prom planning. After a solid few minutes of Hachiman and the woman going back and forth, she finally caves and agrees to go to bat with the school admin and the PTA to greenlight another prom. She also puts Yukino on notice that if she's jumping in with Hachiman, she better see it through no matter what, and Yukino fires back that quitting is not in her vocabulary. Hachiman walks Yukino through everything standing in their way, and she tells him, without blinking, that she can handle it. Later, on the walk back, Yukino grills Hachiman about the moves he pulled in that meeting and demands to know what happened to Yui's wish. Hachiman breaks it down for her that everything he did was part of making Yui's wish a reality, then steers the conversation straight into the territory of where they stand with each other. He tells her their bond is on the edge of completely falling apart because neither of them actually talks to the other, but Yukino insists she's actively working on that. She then tries to hurry off, but Hachiman reaches out and stops her, straight up confessing that he wants her in his life. Yukino hits him back with a wave of self-doubt, tearing herself down as someone not even worth his time, but he holds firm and tells her he's into her exactly as she is. As their hands find each other, Yukino asks him to let her into his world, and right then and there, the two of them officially become a couple. The week after, Hachiman and Yukino link up in the service club room to hash out all the headaches that come with pulling off a joint prom. Hachiman is dragging his feet on the idea of looping Yui in, but Yukino has every intention of going to her herself soon enough. Since the prom is pulling in students from multiple schools, they throw Inagi Seaside Park into the mix as a possible spot. They settle on scoping it out in person the very next day, which just so happens to land on a holiday. The next day at Inagi Seaside Park, it immediately becomes clear that basically the entire population decided to show up too. After grabbing a breather and taking a bunch of selfies at the cafe, they go check out another spot tucked right beside a chapel and an event hall packed with all kinds of facilities. When all is said and done, they both agree that this is the place where the joint prom is going down. The day after, back in the service club room, Hachiman and Yukino are joined by Sagami and Hatano as they start working through a mountain of venue-related requests. A little while in, Iroha swoops in with the student council vice president and secretary in tow to throw their weight behind the effort. Saika also rolls through the door, and Hachiman wastes no time asking whether the whole tennis club can be pulled in to help with the prep work. Saika says yes, without hesitation. Out of absolutely nowhere, Hayato, Kakeru, Yumiko, Hina, and Saki all pile into the room, offering to pitch in too. Right as things are about to get started, Yui shows up, and both Hachiman and Yukino visibly breathe a sigh of relief. After grinding through hours of work, the whole crew taps out for a break and makes their way over to the Yukai Sukai sauna. While everyone's just vibing and unwinding, Kakeru fires at Hachiman asking if he and Yukino are actually together, and Saika chimes in reminding him of a deal they made a while back, which has Hachiman absolutely wanting to disappear into the floor. Once they're out of the sauna, Hachiman tracks down Yukino, Yui, and Iroha all kicked back and chilling on a bench together. A little bit later, Yui and Iroha peel away and head back to the group, with Hachiman and Yukino trailing right behind them. The big day of the joint prom finally hits, and the event hall is buzzing with everyone scrambling through last-minute prep. Komachi shows her face, and Yui practically explodes with excitement, introducing her to Iroha, and somehow they click instantly. Picking up on the fact that Yui is still low-key wrestling with where she stands in Hachiman and Yukino's relationship, the two of them take a moment to hype her up. Yukino's mom makes her entrance not long after, and wastes no time reminding Yukino of everything that could go sideways with the joint prom. Yukino looks her dead in the eye and tells her she's fully ready to own whatever happens. Haruno also slides in to wish Yukino good luck, and playfully tells Hachiman he better strap in for whatever's coming. Mid-prom, Hachiman is running around coordinating with his crew to put out a catering fire when he crosses paths with Yui and steps up to give her a hand, while Iroha and Komachi watch from a distance, looking like they're definitely cooking something up between them. As the joint prom winds down and the curtain finally drops, Shizuka rolls up and gives Hachiman props for the insane turnout. She pulls him out onto the floor for a dance, but when Hachiman fumbles over his own feet, the two of them go down together. Once they're back on their feet, she brings up the question of whether he ever found that something real he's been chasing. Happy with what he tells her, they seal it with a handshake, and Hachiman takes a genuine moment to thank Shizuka for every single thing she's ever done for him before they say their goodbyes. Hachiman then goes hunting for Yukino, only to get immediately buried in another pile of work. Then, out of absolutely nowhere, Yukino hits him with an "I love you" and bolts immediately, leaving him standing there completely frozen. Back in the service club room, Hachiman and Yukino are grinding through the last of the post-prom paperwork together. Yukino extends an invite for Hachiman to come over for dinner at her place the next evening, apparently at her mother's request. Hachiman's first instinct is to wriggle his way out of it, but Yukino casually rattles off everyone's schedules with zero effort, shutting down every single excuse he tries to throw out. Right at that moment, Komachi strolls in and puts in a request to join the club. Yukino opens the door wide for her, but Hachiman is quick to point out that the club is dead and they're not exactly holding auditions. That's when Iroha comes bursting through the door completely winded and slaps down an officially approved application for the service club, with Komachi as president and Hachiman and Yukino listed as members. That plot twist hits both Hachiman and Yukino like a truck they absolutely did not see coming. Right after that, Yui also walks through the door with something she needs help with, so Yukino welcomes her in and gets started on the tea. Later, as everyone settles into club mode, Hachiman's thoughts start drifting to the quiet realization that his love life turned out nothing like he ever pictured it would. Comment Hachiman if you watched this recap to the end, and if you enjoy anime recaps like this, subscribe to the channel and watch this next video.